Distant Dreams. Written by Alicia Rades. Narrated by Amanda Elgie. Chapter 1. When I dreamed, I saw endless possibilities, though everyone told me I was being unrealistic. I wished they understood that there was nothing more real to me than my dreams. "Just you wait and see," I said with a smirk. My bedroom was empty, and I was speaking to myself. But when I said stuff like that, it felt like I could believe in anything. I sat at my desk in my room, and the printer beside me whirred. My fingers trailed over the dozen photo albums lining my bookshelf. This was a nightly ritual for me, printing a photo of somewhere I wanted to go and adding it to one of my dream books. I told everyone my dream books were about the places I wanted to visit someday. But that was a lie. The books were filled with pictures of the places I'd already been. No one would believe that, though. Kai Watson, a girl who had never physically left the Midwest, claimed to have seen most of the world by age 16. It just didn't make sense. And that's why I was taking the secret of my astral travels to the grave. Each night was a new journey for me. Tonight, I was visiting Yalong Bay in China. While everyone else at school was at the homecoming dance, I was preparing to travel the world. Savannah wanted me to go to the dance with her, but it wasn't my thing. She didn't have a date, but I knew she'd find some guy to run off with and leave me sitting in a corner alone. I'd rather be traveling the world. The image of the blue ocean printed clearly. I pulled it from the printer's tray and placed it in the next slot of my photo album. That's where my dreams are taking me, I thought proudly while admiring the gradient of the blue sea. Braden burst into my room. I quickly slammed the book shut, and my eyes narrowed at my little brother. I wished he wouldn't do that. "Mom said you know where the TV remote is?" he blurted. Before I had a chance to answer, his gaze locked on my dream book. "Why are you still playing around with that stuff? How many do you have now?" "Don't worry about it," I told him. I tried not to be hard on my brother about this kind of thing, because Braden was younger than me by 4 years, and he didn't get it. My dreams could take me anywhere I wanted them to. He scoffed. "It would take you a lifetime to visit all those places, even if by some miracle you could afford the fastest jet in the world." Braden would never know I didn't need a jet to get to those places. My means of travel were much quicker. But this was a prime example of why I couldn't tell anyone. No one would believe I could lucidly travel in my sleep. "It's just for fun," I answered, though I knew it was much more than that. "One day, maybe you can come with me." "Yeah, sounds like fun," Braden scoffed. He was clearly making fun of me, and I didn't like it. He stared at me blankly for several long seconds. "The remote, Kai?" "Aren't you supposed to be going to bed?" I asked. "Mom says I can watch one episode," he told me before childishly sticking his tongue in my direction. I found it more annoying than anything. "It's on top of the TV," I said. "And seriously, knock next time. You never know when you might walk in on my naked butt." A look of disgust crossed his face, but it was enough to make him flee at the thought. I laughed. Now it was time for some peace and quiet. I crawled into bed and pulled the covers over me, settling in for another night of traveling the world. I twirled my crescent moon pendant around in my fingers before closing my eyes and drifting off. I didn't truly fall asleep the way most people did. At least, my mind didn't. Once I relaxed enough, my spirit separated from my body. Astral projection had always come naturally to me. I didn't know why I could do it. All I knew was that every time I fell asleep, my spirit left my body, free to roam the world as I pleased. In my spiritual state, I stood at my bedside and looked down at my sleeping form. My chest rose and fell slowly. My body would be safe here while I took my spirit elsewhere. I closed my eyes. Not my physical eyes, since those were already closed, but my spiritual eyes that felt like they were there but really weren't. An image of Yalong Bay came to mind. At first, the image was still, like the one I'd just printed, but as I focused, it slowly became animated in my imagination, until waves were crashing against the shore and voices came into focus. When I opened my eyes, I was standing at the edge of the ocean, and the sun shone bright above me. I forgot about the argument with my brother as I took in the gorgeous scenery. Dazzling green-blue water stretched as far as the eye could see, and a strip of luscious green land curved around the bay. Fluffy clouds drifted across the sky, and palm trees swayed back and forth in the breeze. Families splashed in the waves, and laughter rang out from beneath cabanas along the beach. Nearby, a group of friends my age played volleyball in the sand. I turned around to take in the beautiful mountains rising behind me. The sun glistened off the windows of tall resorts dotted throughout the landscape. Behind the buildings, the most gorgeous green mountains rose in the distance. It was an incredible tropical paradise. My eyes journeyed downward to admire the sand at my feet. I dug my toes in, except the sand didn't move around them. When I imagined it, though, I could almost feel it. My body wasn't here to take in the sensations, but whatever I wanted to feel in spirit became true. Just by imagining it, I could feel the sun warming my arms. I closed my eyes again, conjuring up an image of a green bikini to replace my pajamas. When I opened my eyes, I was wearing the swimming suit I had pictured in my mind. I began walking along the sand where the water met the beach. Cool water drifted over my toes. I looked down to see a white shell at my feet, and I bent to inspect it. It was cone-shaped and twisted like a conch shell, only it was smaller, with beautiful brown speckles over it. I picked it up and twisted it around in my hands. "Mama!" a kid called. He couldn't be more than 7 years old. He skidded to a stop beside me, then bent to pick up the shell I'd been looking at. His hands went straight through me, and he snatched the shell from the sand. "It's pretty, isn't it?" I asked with a smile, but he didn't hear me. "I found a shell!" he called to his parents. He waved the shell in the air and raced back to a cabana where a vacationing family lounged. His mom sat up straight, looking excited as he showed off his treasure. "Wow," she raved, "it's so pretty." My gaze drifted back to my hand, where I'd been holding a shell just a moment ago, but now my hands were empty. I'd never really picked up the shell at all. The shell I'd held had only been my imagination. My spirit was standing here in real time, surrounded by people, but I couldn't truly interact. All I could do was observe. I watched the family for a while, taking in their laughter. The kid had moved on from shell hunting and was building sandcastles with his dad. I tried to imagine my family doing anything like that, and I couldn't picture it. Brayden wanted nothing to do with me, and Mom never had the time. I left the family and continued down the beach. Hours passed as I inspected seashells and found crabs scurrying across the sand. I jumped in the waves and swam in the water before lying back in the sand to bask in the sun. My breathing slowed as I enjoyed the imaginary heat on my face. Laughter and joy surrounded me, and I soaked it in. Eventually, I pushed myself to my elbows. I looked around and took note of children playing in the sand, really touching it and interacting with it. I witnessed couples holding hands, making jokes as they walked along the beach side by side. One day, I was going to have that. I would find someone who dreamed as big as I did, and he was going to get me out of my tiny town of Amberg. We were going to travel the world. I got sad thinking about that, because as big as my dreams were, I often wondered if I'd ever find someone to share them with. That was the one dream I couldn't quite believe in. I decided I'd been lying in the sand long enough. I let my lids fall shut again. When I opened them, I was back in my bedroom, once again clothed in my pajamas. I glanced at the clock and noticed it was almost 2 a.m. My gaze shifted to my sleeping body on the bed. I wished I could bring my body with me on my travels, but I didn't think that was going to happen anytime soon. My family wasn't the most financially stable. I'd picked up a job at the grocery store as soon as I turned 16. I intended to save up money to travel after high school. It wasn't much money, though. I only worked 2 hours on weekdays and part-time on weekends. At the very least, my savings would give me a head start, and then I would make money as a travel blogger to fund my adventures. That was the plan anyway. Mom liked to borrow money from me every chance she got. Of course, she never paid it back. If my family actually had money like Darla Baxter's or Tiana King's, maybe I could bring my dreams of traveling for real to life. Unfortunately, that's all my current travels were. Dreams. Of some sort, at least. I couldn't stay in this house all night. I felt so trapped here. I had to get out. I headed to the front door. I didn't need to leave through the front door. I could walk straight through my bedroom wall, or close my eyes and visualize my destination and be there in a snap. But habit got the better of me. I stepped through the door as if I were a ghost. My feet moved under me, carrying my spirit through town and along my running route. I didn't run tonight, though. The town was silent, and the streets were empty. I reached the trailhead at the bottom of one of the bluffs surrounding town and began up the trail. This was always my favorite part of my jogging route. It was especially pretty this time of year when the leaves were beginning to change color, and the trail up the slope was overtaken by mesmerizing fall colors. I couldn't see the colors in the darkness, though. Not after I'd escaped the glow of the street lamps. Most of the time, that would bother me, but not on this path. I knew every rock and route well enough that the soft illumination from the moon was all I needed to guide my way. I emerged from the woods and into a clearing. Eagle Park stood at the peak of the bluff, and it was my favorite spot in town. From here, I could see for miles over top of the rolling hills, and I could look out over the river that flowed below the cliff. There was a parking lot on the other side of a clump of trees to my left, but I had taken the road less traveled, up a trail that had been beaten down over the years by hikers and runners like me. Moonlight illuminated the hills far in the distance. I crossed the expansive clearing and walked past a wooden barrier that kept people from getting too close to the edge of the cliff. A flat cliff face met up with a river below. I had to be standing over 30 feet above the water. Normally, I'd be freaked out by being this close to the edge, but I knew no harm could come to me in my spiritual state. If I fell, I'd simply be jolted awake. I lay on my back, my toes still dangling off the edge of the cliff. I just want to get out of this tiny town, I thought. I wanted to truly touch the sand on the beach and let it fall through my fingers. I wanted to share that experience with someone. Unfortunately, I couldn't do that unless I traveled for real and took my body with me. A shrill cry cut through my thoughts. I jolted to my feet quickly, immediately alert. Another scream resonated from somewhere near the parking lot. Terror stalled me until a third shriek sent me running toward the source. Someone was in trouble. I pushed through the trees. When they began to thin, I slowed and crouched low. I don't know why I did. No one could see me, but that didn't register at the moment. My eyes locked on a bush where the sound of shuffling bodies and weak coughing was coming from. A thud came, throwing long brown hair into view. The girl's head smashed into the ground violently. She let out a grunt, but it was barely audible. Then, before I could manage to breathe, a rock came down on the girl's skull. Blood oozed from a fresh wound. One more time, a concealed figure cracked the rock against the girl's forehead. It was only when she went limp and her head swiveled in my direction that I saw her eyes. They stared my way lifelessly, while blood trickled down her familiar face. A shriek ripped out of my lungs. Before I could really process what I had just seen, the bluff washed away from my vision. I felt my spirit spring back to my body as if they were connected by elastic. I bolted upright in bed, my heart hammering. A sheen of sweat coated my body. I didn't even realize I was truly screaming until my mother burst into my bedroom. "What's going on?" she demanded. I forced myself to swallow the bile rising in my throat, but I didn't answer. I couldn't believe what I'd just seen had been real. "I had a nightmare," I finally said breathlessly. Only the horror had been real. I'd just witnessed Darla Baxter's murder, and I had no idea who killed her. Chapter 2. I hadn't slept the rest of the night. The thought that a murderer was out there roaming the streets of Amberg frightened me to my very core. After my mom went back to bed, I made sure to check that the doors and windows were locked throughout the house, just to be safe. Then I huddled under the covers and listened intently for any signs of danger. Nothing happened, and my family and I were safe. For now. The killer had no idea I'd been there, so he obviously wasn't going to come after me. I thought about telling my mom, but I knew how that would sound. She'd never believe me. I had to trust that the police would find evidence and arrest the killer before he hurt anyone else. I had no choice but to go into work the next day. Sure, finding myself witness to a crime may have gotten me off the hook, But how could I possibly explain that to anyone? I couldn't exactly call up my boss and say, "Look, I can't make it in today because I was astral traveling last night and watched one of my classmates get murdered. I'm kind of traumatized by it." I didn't think that would go over well. Even if I wanted to tell someone what I saw, I couldn't possibly explain what I was doing up at the bluff so late when everyone knew I'd been at home sleeping. My mom and my brother woke to my screams at the same time it happened. I had convinced my family it was a bad dream, but I didn't think they'd be forgetting that my nightmare woke them at 2 a.m. anytime soon. "Kai?" My coworker must have said for the third time. I finally looked at her and stood up a little straighter behind my register. "Yeah? Are you okay?" she asked. "Sorry, Meg. I didn't get enough sleep last night." At least that was the truth. "Tell me about it." Megara, Meg for short, rolled her eyes. She stood about 5'2" and looked younger than me, even though she was a good 8 years older. "My son was up all night puking. Anyway, would you mind?" She didn't have to finish her sentence. I'd heard the crash a minute ago. Meg stared at me with a pleading expression. "I'm busy right now." I sighed. "It's all right. Thank you." "What aisle was it?" "Aisle 6, she said, pointing. "It was a jar of salsa this time." She rushed off in the opposite direction while I abandoned the register and headed to gather the cleaning supplies. I began picking up the broken glass and wiping up the salsa, tossing glass shards and dirty rags into the bucket beside me. The red splatters made me think of blood, which made me think of Darla. I couldn't wrap my head around how cruel someone had been to kill her. It made me want to hide away in my house and never come out, because if anyone was capable of that kind of evil, I wasn't sure I wanted to be around people anymore. I'd been waiting hours to hear whispers of the murder, but so far, I hadn't heard a thing. Surely the police would have arrested the perpetrator by now. Maybe they were keeping it under wraps. If that was the case, they were doing a pretty good job of it. It was Sunday and work was slow, but I figured someone would have heard something. In a tiny town like Amberg, which everyone I knew called Hamburger, probably fueled by our one and only fast food place in town, Amberg Hamburger, a murder would be the hottest news in the last decade. So what did that mean? I had the thought that I'd imagined it all. Maybe it all had been a dream. Or maybe it meant no one had found her yet. That sent chills through my entire body. Because it meant anyone in this town could be the killer. They could be roaming the aisles of this grocery store right now, hunting for their next victim. Or tracking down witnesses. I snatched up my bucket and stood far too quickly to shake off the thought. I ended up whirling around straight into a solid wall of muscle. The bucket fell from my hand and clattered to the ground. Broken shards of the salsa jar scattered across the floor again. I stumbled back a few steps and lifted my gaze to meet familiar brown eyes. My breath caught. It was Darla Baxter. He was in my grade, and we'd been on the cross-country team together until I quit, so I could take this job. He was also Darla's younger brother. My eyes widened. His sister is dead. That's all that went through my head. "I'm sorry, Collin," I managed to say. "Don't worry about it," he replied kindly. "Here, let me help." Collin bent down to help clean up. He thought I was apologizing for bumping into him, but my words held a far deeper meaning. "You don't have to do that," I said as I knelt beside him. "It's my job." "And it was my mistake bumping into you," he said. "Let me help, Kai." My cheeks flamed. The sound of my name coming off his lips was strange. Collin and I weren't exactly friends, but we knew each other from school, and we had been on the same sports team. Something about him seemed different today, though. I eyed him as he helped pick up. Collin was several inches taller than me, with a lean build and brown hair that fell into his eyes. He was cute, but the smile he usually wore wasn't there today. I didn't see it at first, but when I stole another glance at him, I noticed a rim of red outlined his eyes. I wanted to kick the ass of whoever made him feel this way. He must know about Darla, I thought. I didn't want to prod, but I had to know if what I'd seen was real or some nightmare I'd made up. But I couldn't just come out and say it. "Are you okay, Collin?" I asked gently. He furrowed his brow. "Fine. Why do you ask?" "I just want to make sure," I said. Collin paused. but he was difficult to read. It's cross-country season, and things get stressful between sports and homework. You know how it goes. We finished cleaning up and I stood. Yeah, I guess so. He nudged me lightly in the shoulder. You should sign up for the team again next year. It'll be our senior year, our last chance to make it to state. The girls are falling behind without you. I gave a nervous smile. My job keeps me busy, but I'll think about it. I hope you will, he said. Collin was being so nice to me, but there was a tension in the air that hadn't ever been there before. Something was definitely wrong. I just couldn't be sure if it was what I was thinking. I've got to finish my shopping, Collin stated. I guess I'll see you around. See you, I said. I moved out of his way so he could reach the corn chips I was blocking. After returning my cleaning supplies to their storage area, I hurried back to the register just as Collin was approaching the checkout counter. Did you find everything all right? I asked. Yeah, he replied, but it barely sounded like him. I scanned his bag of chips and a jar of nacho cheese and rang up his total. I remember a time in cross-country when Collin had told our team that nachos were his comfort food. If he did know what happened to Darla, he certainly wasn't ready to talk about it. I couldn't look in his eyes for fear that he'd see what I was thinking. Your sister is dead. I wondered if he knew who the suspects were. The police must have a whole list by now. As much as I wanted to say something, I didn't want to rub salt in his wound. All I managed to say was, paper or plastic? He rushed from the grocery store quickly after I bagged his items. I stared after him, but he disappeared into the pouring rain. You could cut the tension in the room with a knife. Meg's voice sounded from behind me. I whirled around to face her. What? That kid, Collin, right? Did you two date or something? Meg leaned against the corner of the next register casually. What? No. I spoke almost too quickly as I brushed a strand of red hair out of my face. Why would you say that? Well, that whole thing was awkward. Didn't you say you were busy with something? I asked, hoping she'd drop the subject. It was awkward. Did I? Meg asked innocently, straightening up. No, I just didn't want to clean up the salsa. An amused smile twitched at the corner of her lips. I threw a pin near my register at her, and she dodged out of the way, laughing. The rest of the day passed by slowly. I kept expecting to receive a text from Savannah about Darla. If there was news about her, Savannah would know. But when her text finally came, she didn't mention her. You totally missed out last night, Savannah's text read. God, she was right. I probably wouldn't have had any fun, but at least the horrible images in my mind wouldn't be there. Go on, I texted back. I didn't have to worry about pulling my phone out during work because there was only one customer who was still browsing the aisle, and my boss wasn't in today. The dance was fun, and then I went to the after party. Worry knotted in my stomach. Knowing Savannah, she got wasted last night. I only hoped nothing bad happened to her because of it. I had the thought I should have gone with her, if only to keep an eye on her. You're okay, right? Of course I am. It was loads of fun. Please don't tell me you got drunk. Maybe a little, but don't worry. Nothing bad happened. I'll tell you more at school. I was glad to hear she was safe. I suppose if I had gone to the party with her, I wouldn't have witnessed what I'd seen, and I might be the only person who knew anything. Not that it would help anyway, because I hadn't seen the murderer's face. I'd seen some horrible things while astral traveling, but never something like this. When I was younger, my spirit always came out of my body at night. I couldn't explain why. It was just something I could always do. I used to make my parents keep the TV on. They thought I couldn't sleep without the noise. I just wanted to keep myself occupied. One night when I was 12, I was watching cartoons late, and I heard my parents talking about their divorce. They either thought I was asleep or figured the TV would drown out their conversation, but it couldn't. Not when my spirit was in the same room as them. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to accept that my parents were separating. I still remember the pain that shuddered through my soul. I couldn't be around my parents, not when they were fighting. All I wanted to do was run away. I wished I could go to my grandma's house and seek comfort in her. I closed my eyes and pictured her living room, and when I opened them, I was there. That's when I realized I could control where I went. A month later, my grandma died. The next few months were agony. My life was being ripped apart, and I had to find a way to put the pieces back together again. That only drove me to travel more. I fell in love with it, and that's when I started the dream book. Even when I was little, it didn't take me long to realize that I was the only one who could astral travel. My family would sometimes talk about their dreams, how strange and weird they were, and I knew my dreams were different. When I tried to tell them what I could do, nobody would believe me, and so I kept it to myself. I hoped the police released the news about Darla soon, because if they hadn't found anything, I didn't know how to tell them what I knew. Eventually, my shift ended, and I hurried home. When I arrived, I slammed the front door a bit too forcefully. "Somebody's angry," Braden accused from the living room couch. He was sprawled across the whole thing and munching on pretzels. He plunged them into a container of dip. "Hey," I cried, "you can't eat that." I lunged for the container and snatched it out of his hands. "What are you doing?" he yelled back. "This is for Mom's mashed potatoes." I pulled the container protectively away from him. It was only French onion dip with bacon, but Mom and I had specifically bought it for her custom recipe. "I was eating that," Braden cried. "Kai," my mother scolded as she entered the room, "what's going on in here?" My gaze shifted between my mother and my brother. "Braden's eating the dip we bought for your mashed potatoes. You know, my favorite." "That's not even how you make mashed potatoes," Braden sneered. "It's how Mom makes them," I shot back. "Well, it's not how normal people make them," Braden spat before diving for the dip again. "Stop it." My mom pushed between us before turning to me. "Kai, I told him he could eat it. It's about to expire, and I just don't have the time to make the mashed potatoes." I quickly checked the expiration date. Sure enough, the package would expire tomorrow. I didn't think it had been that long since we bought it. I'd make the potatoes myself, but I could never quite get them as good as Mom's. Had it really been that long since she cooked us a decent dinner that wasn't frozen pizza or a meal in a box? My mother placed her hands on her hips. "Hand it back to your brother and you can both share." I did as I was told, but suddenly lost my appetite. I shrugged like it didn't matter, but it definitely did. Mom promised me she'd make those potatoes, and she'd completely forgotten. She obviously didn't care what it meant to me. I hurried out of the room and away from them both. At least in my bedroom, I could find solace in researching new places to visit tonight. I sat at my second-hand computer. It was an ancient laptop Mom had given me when she finally upgraded hers. It was slower than molasses, but it was compatible with the $10 printer I'd found at a garage sale a few summers ago. I settled on visiting the Tarlo River National Park in Australia. I'd never been there and thought it might be interesting to break away from some of the bigger crowds and explore the terrain. I crawled into bed that night with the intention of getting out of here and seeing a bigger world. I drifted off, but something didn't feel right. I didn't think about where I was or how I'd gotten there. The moon shone above me, illuminating Eagle Park. I crouched behind the trees and stared at a nearby bush. Darla Baxter's face came into view. A hand clutching a rock rose up before accelerating toward her hairline. 1 crack, 2 cracks. Darla's head went limp, and her motionless eyes pointed in my direction. My heart leapt and I sprang awake. The yelp that escaped my lips this time only lasted a split second, so no one rushed in to check on me. I sprang straight up in bed, and my hands quivered. I couldn't place what had just occurred. How could something like that happen 2 nights in a row? Did Darla make it out alive Saturday night, only for the killer to come after her to finish the job tonight? How did I get up on the bluff anyway? It didn't make any sense. Oh God. I quickly put the pieces together and understood what the strange sensation I'd felt had been. For the first time in my life, I'd had a real dream. Something had gone wrong with my astral projection, and I was stuck in this tiny town, with a killer on the loose. Chapter 3. The whole thing was a dream. That was the only thing that made sense. I dreamed of Darla's murder and made the whole thing up, or so I told myself. I couldn't help but think that my dream last night had been more like a memory. For the second night in a row, I couldn't sleep. That made it easier to accept Savannah's invitation for coffee in the morning. I didn't usually go with her because I didn't want to spend money, but this morning, I needed the caffeine. Whispers caught my interest as I approached the doors to Amberg Hamburger. I rudely tried to listen in, but I didn't hear Darla's name. I could only catch that something had happened with the homecoming king and queen over the weekend. I ordered my coffee and found a seat beside Savannah, who was already waiting for me. She ran her fingers through her hair as we sipped our coffee. This week, it was black with blue tips. Savannah's mom was a cosmetologist, like mine. They worked together at the only hair salon in town. Unlike my family, though, Savannah's actually had some money since her dad was an accountant, and, well, I didn't have a dad to help out. Savannah took advantage of her mom's job and dyed her hair a new color almost every week. Her eccentric hairstyle was like a neon sign telling everyone she didn't care what they thought of her, and I admired that. Everyone else I knew admired her too. Savannah was way cooler and more popular than me, and she could make friends at the drop of a hat. That didn't surprise me, because she was super fun to be around. I loved her like a sister, and I knew if I had any chance of getting out of this town, it was with someone as confident and determined as Savannah. The only thing I couldn't figure out was why she was friends with me. I mean, everyone liked her, and I basically tried to make myself as invisible as possible as I planned my escape from Amberg. Truth was, our moms were friends, so we'd been friends as long as I could remember. We could tell each other anything. Well, almost anything. "Earth to Kai," Savannah snapped her fingers in front of my face. "I'm sorry," I told her. "I didn't sleep well last night. I like your hair, by the way." "Thank you," she said, bouncing her hair in her hand before reaching over to play with mine. "Your red hair would look killer with some black stripes." "No, thanks," she pouted playfully. "Can't we at least try a semi-permanent dye?" "I like my hair the way it is," I said, stroking my fingers through the coppery strands. "Mr. Spears is going to have a fit if you keep your hair that color until the play." Savannah was in the school play, Enchanting, which was a spoof of common fairy tales. Our school did 2 plays a year, and Savannah had made it her life goal to play a part in each one. She never stopped telling me that she hoped she'd take the lead our senior year, but for now, she was only playing a woodland creature. At least she looked cute in her deer costume. I was pretty sure she'd rock any lead role she got. When she first met our director, Mr. Spears, she put on a British accent for a whole week and convinced him she was a foreign exchange student. Even so, Mr. Spears had this seniority thing going, so our fingers were crossed that Savannah would make the lead in one of the plays next year. She deserved it. I couldn't join the cast because play practice ran through my work schedule. Still, I helped on the sets and costumes during the short break I had between school and work. "Relax," Savannah insisted, rolling her eyes at me. "I'll dye it brown to match my costume before opening day. But my hair doesn't matter. We have things to discuss." By the look in her eyes, I could tell there was gossip she'd been dying to spill. "I heard something happened between the homecoming king and queen," I remarked. "Yes," she gushed, sitting up straighter. "I saw the whole thing go down between Anna and Hunter. After the dance, I went to this after party. It was supposed to be super secret, but tons of people were there. Anyway, it's this sort of tradition that someone blindfolds the king and queen and then puts them in a closet together. It's like 7 minutes in heaven or something. But Anna has a boyfriend from out of town." "This doesn't sound good," I said. Savannah shook her head, and her eyes got even wider. "Not at all. Anna told her friends she didn't want to do it, to go in the closet with Hunter. And so when they blindfolded her and took her to the closet, she freaked out. She started hitting her friends and screaming." Something about this story sounded strangely familiar. "Didn't something like that happen last year?" I asked. "Probably," she said. "There always seems to be some sort of drama at the after party, which is why I couldn't resist going." I'm surprised the police haven't noticed it happens every year and didn't go bust it up. Savannah shrugged, but she overdid the motion like she was practicing for her future acting career. "I'm glad they didn't, because there's more." She seemed really excited, so I played along. "What is it?" She lowered her voice and glanced around before leaning in closer to me to whisper, "Sean Cameron kissed me." I drew in a sharp breath. "You're kidding." Sean was one of the most popular guys in school. He was on the football team. I totally expected her to hook up with someone, but I didn't think it'd be Sean Cameron of all guys. Savannah's brows came together and her jaw dropped. What's so funny about that? It's not funny, it's just unexpected, I said. Oh, you better believe it. With the way I looked last Saturday, the guys couldn't keep their eyes off me. Savannah tossed her hair over her shoulder dramatically. You mean they couldn't stop staring at your giant boobs, I joked. Savannah laughed, shooting a glance down at her ample cleavage. Maybe. So what was it like? I teased. It was magical. She stared off into the distance as if dreaming. He asked me to dance earlier in the night. Can you believe he didn't have a date? And neither did I. I like to keep my options open, you know? So we sort of hung out. At the after party, we were hanging out near the music, and he just kind of did it, and told me he liked me. That he's liked me for a long time. Savannah's face fell. Nothing else happened, though. He got this phone call and had to leave. It wasn't an excuse to ditch you, was it? I'd give him a piece of my mind if he did that. Nobody played with my best friend's feelings like that. No way. I could tell someone was on the other end of the line. Besides, he couldn't take his eyes off me. Savannah flashed her award-winning smile. You should have been there. I bit the inside of my lip, but Savannah must have caught on to my expression. I'm sorry, she said. I know you don't really have the money for a dress. I shrugged like it didn't matter. I have some money. It's just that I'm trying to save it for when I get to go on my big adventure. I might have bought a dress if my mom wasn't constantly borrowing money from me. Savannah wrinkled her nose. Is she still doing that? Now that I thought about it, I couldn't really remember the last time. It's been a while, but she still hasn't paid me back like she promised. I offered for you to wear one of my dresses, Savannah said. I nearly burst out laughing. Can you imagine me trying to fit into one of your dresses designed to fit your double Ds? Besides, I'm way taller than you, so any of them would have been too short. Oh, please, they're not that short. You could use showing off your legs. They're your best feature. You see, I have my chest. Sean has his biceps. You're supposed to embrace the good things about yourself. Like how Sean is so good at kissing. She smiled like it was a triumph to find a way to remind me of her hot kiss with Sean. I expected Savannah to dish some gossip on Darla, but she hadn't mentioned her at all. I was going to have to dig for information if I was going to learn anything. Didn't Sean used to date Darla Baxter? I asked, trying to steer the conversation. Savannah sipped her coffee. Yeah, for like a year. Why? She wasn't jealous when she saw you two kissing? I wondered. I don't remember her being in the general vicinity. Savannah obviously didn't know anything about Darla. Didn't mean I couldn't get some answers out of her. I furrowed my brow. She didn't go to the dance? That's weird. No, she did. She was on homecoming court. I don't want to know what would have happened if she saw us kissing. I heard she never really got over him. I don't think she stayed the whole time, though, so she must have been gone by then. I know when they tried to get a picture of the homecoming court at the party, she had already left. There's no other gossip on her? I pressed. If she'd gotten into a fight with someone at the dance, that might explain a few things. Not that I heard. Wait, did you hear something? Savannah's face suddenly lit up. No. What time did the dance end again? She eyed me like I was being weird. It went until midnight. That left 2 hours until I saw her murder. I wondered what she'd been doing during that time and who had been with her. Something else bothered me too. The fact that no one was talking about it. Either I had imagined it and Darla was still alive, or nobody knew what happened. I glanced to the clock on the wall. We're running late. If we don't chug our coffees and get going, we're going to be late for first period. Savannah and I rushed the 2 blocks to school and made it before the first bell rang. I looked for Darla at her locker, hoping to confirm it was all a dream and that she was safe, but she wasn't there. Darla was a year older than me and a senior, so we didn't have any classes together. I watched for her in the halls, but I didn't see her all day. During my study hall, I checked out last year's yearbook from the library and sat in a corner flipping through it. It felt like if I saw her face, I could believe nothing bad happened to her. Darla had been popular and in a bunch of clubs, so she was in the yearbook a lot. I ran my fingers over a picture of her jumping midair beside a volleyball net, and I found another photo where she was smiling with her MVP trophy on the basketball team. On the Community Service Club page, there was a photo of her in a giant leaf pile from when the club did their annual leaf raking event at the local nursing home. She had leaves on her head like a crown and was making a silly face at the camera. On another page, she was riding a zip line in Costa Rica when a group of kids from the Spanish class took a trip there last year. She looked so happy and carefree. I couldn't imagine that anyone would want to hurt her. After school, I stepped into the auditorium to help with the set for the play. I had a half hour until I had to head to work, and painting made me feel useful. The play opened Saturday afternoon, and we were almost finished building the set. I quietly chatted with a few people I knew well. Tyler, who was one of the tech crew guys working with mics and lighting, and Lindsay, a student helping with costume design. Lindsay looked really busy stitching costumes together, and I offered to help her. She asked me to sew a few buttons onto a skirt while Tyler made finishing touches to the set. I didn't really know how to sew, but Lindsay promised it was simple. Mr. Spears called the practice to order, and Tiana King's voice filled the stage. She was the epitome of beauty. Big blue eyes, long blonde hair, and a smile that would win a beauty pageant. She was playing the lead role of Cinderella. I'd already heard her lines a million times because Savannah insisted on memorizing the lead role, even though she was just an extra. I knew she loved the practice, though. Tiana wasn't just the lead in the play. She was also Darla Baxter's best friend. If anyone knew anything, it had to be her. I waited until she came off stage and set my sewing supplies aside. I approached her. "I want to wear the ball gown for the receiving line," Tiana told Mr. Spears. "The play ends with you in Cinderella's peasant clothing," he explained. "I get that, but I think the audience would like the ball gown better. It's so pretty." "It really does say Cinderella, doesn't it?" "You can change back into it as long as we don't waste any time." Mr. Spears turned to me. "Kai, you'll be here for the play, right?" I nodded. "That's the plan. I took off work that day." "Perfect. You'll help Miss King into her dress after curtain call. If she's going to do a costume change for the receiving line, it has to be quick. You can help her, right?" I'd be moving sets during scene changes, but it's not like I was doing anything else after curtain call. "Yeah, I can help." Tiana smiled. "Thank you so much. Do you mind if I show you something real quick before practice starts?" I followed her until we were alone. Tiana stopped in front of her ball gown that was hanging on one of the racks backstage. "There's this piece of fabric here." She pointed while gathering the dress in her hands to show me. "It tends to get caught in the zipper, so you have to make sure to push it out of the way when you zip the dress up." I nodded. "Got it." Tiana eyed me curiously. "Why aren't you in the play? You'd make a great mermaid with your red hair. I mean, Krista does a great job, but she just doesn't have the look, even with the wig, you know?" I ran my finger through the ends of my hair. "I have work at 4, so I can't stick around for the full rehearsal." Tiana frowned. "That's a shame." "Tiana," I said quickly before she could turn away and head back toward the main stage. I quickly glanced around and noticed no one near us. "Can I ask you something?" "Ask me anything," she said kindly. "I noticed Darla wasn't in school today. Is she okay?" She furrowed her brow. "What do you mean?" "You were her best friend, right?" I nearly flinched when I realized that I'd thought of Darla in the past tense. "Yeah, I was," Tiana said. "That was a long time ago. I'm sure she's fine. I heard she's out sick." "Oh," I said flatly. "Someone should check up on her, just to make sure." "I'll give her a call and let you know if I hear anything," Tiana promised, before Mr. Spears called her name from the stage. Tiana hurried off to rehearse lines, leaving me standing there dejectedly. If Tiana King didn't know what happened to Darla, I was going to have to find answers somewhere else. And I knew just where to start. Chapter 4. After work, I suited up for my evening run the way I did most nights. I pulled on my running pants, my favorite t-shirt, and my ratty old sneakers and took off. With the chilly wind rushing through my red ponytail, I was surprised at how good it felt to push forward on the pavement. I'd be on the cross-country team if it wasn't for my job, and the sliver of hope that I might still be able to save up just enough money to leave this town. Although I was alone with my thoughts, it was easy to take my mind off everything when I was running. A sense of happiness filled my soul, the kind of happiness I felt when I thought about traveling. I ran partially because I loved it, but I also knew I had to stay in shape for when I finally hopped on a plane and found myself at the beginning of my epic adventure. I figured I'd start with a sport like skydiving or backpacking. Those were things I couldn't do in my dreams. They were true experiences, much in contrast to my normal passive observations. My feet slapped against the deserted road, a sound that left me filled with a sense of accomplishment. I zigzagged through the streets of Amberg without really paying attention to my surroundings. My route took me mostly through residential areas and then out past the town cemetery. Although the bright fall leaves gave character to the rest of the town, the trees behind the gates of the cemetery appeared dull, like they knew death lay beneath them. The air grew chillier as I raced along the road, which sent an eerie sensation down my spine. I quickened my pace as I passed the grave markers. I knew I was being silly, but with Halloween approaching, I figured one could never be too careful around a graveyard. Who knew what lay out of sight? I slowed as I reached the base of the bluff and took a deep breath. I was terrified to go back there, but I shook off the nerves. It's not like someone was stalking the bluff waiting for his next victim. At least, I prayed that wasn't the case. I paced near the entrance to the trail, working up the courage to go further. I had to take a look at the crime scene to see if I had imagined it, to see if it happened for real. I swallowed the lump in my throat and took off up the trail. Although the sun was already low in the sky, I could make out the glorious array of colors in the trees. Yellow, orange, and red leaves swirled around me as I pushed up the path. My legs burned slightly, thanks to the steep incline, but I soon found myself breaking free of the trees and emerging into the clearing that stretched out to the edge of the cliff. I inched my way across the clearing, but stopped at the wooden fence about 5 feet short of the edge to catch my breath. It wasn't really a fence or a guardrail, but rather just a deterrent to keep people from getting too close to the edge. It didn't do much, considering I'd seen plenty of people bravely cross it. I couldn't bring myself to get any closer, not when my mind was attached to my body. One misstep and I'd be a goner. It was a beautiful fall evening, but I hadn't come to admire the scenery. I followed the path from the clearing to the parking lot through the clump of trees. As soon as I spotted the parking lot, I noticed the bushes planted neatly around it. The area was tidy and well landscaped, and even though the sun was setting, there were a couple of cars still up here. No doubt the owners were strolling along some of the walking paths, or bravely dangling their feet off the edge of the cliff. I found my way to the tree I had hidden behind when I was in my spirit form. I crouched down to confirm the angle of the bush that now reminded me of death. The bush of death, I thought to myself. It was there, the exact same bush with the exact same tangled branches I'd seen that night. How could I have imagined that? I stepped closer to the bush cautiously, as if I thought Darla's killer would jump out from behind it and crack my skull open. But when the opposite side of the bush came into view, I saw nothing. Absolutely nothing. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe to find the rock, or at the very least a bloodstain, but the area was completely clear. I glanced toward my hiding tree and then back at the bush. It was all here, just as I had seen it that night. There's no way I could have dreamed what happened. Something would have been out of place in my imagination. Yet, something seemed to be missing here, too. I had the thought that the killer could have dumped the body over the cliff to dispose of the evidence. But then I figured someone would have found her body downstream by now. And what about all the other evidence they would have left behind? There was no rock, no body, not even a drop of blood. I began picking up stray leaves that had blown across the manicured grass. I expected to find drops of blood or some upturned dirt or something, but there was nothing. Then again, I wasn't an expert, so I didn't really know what to look for. My hands quivered as I combed the area. I felt queasy knowing what had happened here. Just as I leaned closer to the spot I was sure Darla's head had fallen, I heard the crunch of leaves behind me. My heart immediately jumped in my chest. Oh God, the killer's back! I didn't bother a glance behind myself before I leapt to my feet and took off down the long road that led up to the parking lot. The desire to get as far away as I possibly could overcame me. I hightailed my way out of there without looking back for even a second, and I made it home in record time. I huffed harder than usual when I reached my house. I quickly flung the door shut and locked it behind me before bracing myself against it and finally slowing my breath. Running from something? a male voice asked. My pulse quickened. He's found me, I thought. My eyes sprang open, and I relaxed. It was only my mom's friend Jack, although his posture was strange. The kitchen chair he sat in was pulled out from the table and pointed at the front door. I didn't know what he was doing there. I swallowed deeply. No, just my normal run. A second later, my mother emerged from the hallway and crossed over to the kitchen, which was open to the living room. You're home early, she remarked. I checked the clock on the wall. Dang, I really had made it home fast. Yeah, well, it's starting to get dark outside sooner, and I didn't want to be out at night, I lied. My mother continued what she was doing while I spoke. She reached for a piece of fabric on the table and shook it out in her hands before wrapping it around Jack. No, not a piece of fabric. A cape. I inched my way further into the house. You're cutting Jack's hair? I asked, hoping the hurt wasn't too evident in my tone. It's Officer Delaney, Jack corrected me. He insisted I call him that. Something about respecting authority. But I didn't see how that was fair, considering Mom called him Jack all the time. Besides, Jack fit him better when he wasn't in uniform. Jack had been friends with my mom since high school, but they never dated. Now that they were both divorced, I couldn't see anything stopping them. Although, I was glad he hadn't made a move because I did not want him as a stepfather. I didn't need any more siblings in my life either. Mm-hmm, my mom nodded. I've been asking you to trim my hair for weeks, I pointed out. I pulled at my ponytail to inspect the fuzzy split ends and frowned at how damaged they looked. We'll get to it, I promise. Your brother just heated up some fish sticks if you want some. She gestured to the stove. I sulked over to the cookie sheet of fish sticks. I hoped Jack was paying her. It sickened me to see my mother giving Jack a free haircut when we were already tight on money, and it was what my mom did for a living. I reluctantly managed to eat the fish sticks, thanks greatly in part to Mount Ketchup, and then hurried off toward my room. I couldn't stand watching Mom and Jack laugh together. Mom never laughed like that with me or Brayden. Brayden stopped me in the hall, spreading his arms from one wall to the other. Get out of my way, I demanded through gritted teeth. An evil grin spread across my brother's face. What's the magic word? I let out a puff of air and rolled my eyes. Please? Nope, he said proudly. I pursed my lips. Just let me through. I pushed at his arms, but the darn kid was nearly as big as I was. What's the magic word? He repeated. I shoved past him. Ow, he cried. Be nice to your brother, my mother's voice sounded through the hallway just before I swung my bedroom door shut. I plopped down on my bed. Maybe my mom should just run off with Jack. I could go live with Savannah, and Brayden could go live at his friend Zach's house. I knew it was silly to be mad over a stupid haircut, yet I felt completely justified in it. How could Mom never have time for her own kids, yet she could spare plenty of time for Jack? It just wasn't fair. Nothing had been fair since my dad left us. My dad. That thought was even worse. He only ever called on birthdays and Christmas. Brayden still had this idea that Dad was going to show up one day, get down on one knee, and ask Mom to remarry him. Even if I could dream, I wouldn't have let that thought enter my wildest ones. Dad was never coming back, and sometimes it felt like Mom wished she could leave us too. Half an hour later, Jack's voice carried down the hall, and I heard him say goodbye to my mom. I quickly hurried out of my room and followed him outside. Jack, I called. It's Officer Delaney, he corrected while turning to me. Ugh, Jack was an ass, but I needed to talk to him. We stopped in front of his car that was parked beside the curb. Right, Officer Delaney. Do you know what happened to Darla Baxter? I was surprised I was being so forward about it. He furrowed his brow. I know. How do you know? Oh, shit. He's going to think I'm a suspect. I had to play it cool. I don't know anything, I lied. That's why I'm asking. Darla wasn't in school today and I got worried. There's nothing to worry about, he assured me. Darla will be fine. What do you mean? I asked. She couldn't be fine. Darla isn't hurt? Jack sighed heavily. I shouldn't be telling you this, but this isn't the first time she's run away. Run away? I repeated. That couldn't be right. Why aren't you out there investigating? You need to go find her. Darla's 18, Kai. She can go wherever she wants. Unless the family files a missing persons report, there's nothing to investigate. You can't know that, I pressed. You need to check in with her family. We did, Jack said. We heard she was gone and went to her house, but she's an adult. She doesn't need permission to leave. Let the girl cool off. I'm sure she'll come home soon. Jack seemed so certain. You're sure that's all this is? I asked. I'm sure, Jack insisted. Don't worry yourself over this guy. Darla will come home. Jack was a police officer. Surely he had access to evidence I didn't. If he thought there was nothing to worry about, then I had to believe him. I wanted to believe him more than anything, because that would mean Darla was still alive and well. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Darla was never coming home. Chapter 5. I dreamed of Darla's murder again. I felt ill the rest of the night, but I managed to rest my eyes enough that I could do without the coffee. Are you okay, Kai? Savannah asked me when we met up at our lockers. If she hadn't mentioned my name, I may not have processed anything she'd said. I jerked my gaze toward her. Yeah, I'm fine. You don't look fine. You look tired as hell. Did you sleep at all last night? I don't know. Did I? I tried to, I managed to say. And the problem is? She prompted. I glanced up and down the hall, but no one was paying any attention to us. I've been having this nightmare. Do you want to talk about it? Savannah pulled her textbook across her chest as we headed to class. It's nothing, really, I said with a shrug. You're such a liar, she accused. I couldn't argue with that one. I grabbed Savannah's wrist and pulled her into the closest restroom. I quickly checked the stalls. We were alone. I wanted to tell Savannah what I'd seen, but the last time I tried to tell her about my astral travels, she didn't believe me. She thought I was making it all up. But I wanted to tell her so badly. I couldn't keep this to myself. I took a deep breath. I have these dreams, and when I dream, I see real things. Not this again, Savannah sighed. You know I don't believe in this paranormal stuff. Psychics, premonitions, astral projection. It's not real. A knot formed in the pit of my stomach. I should have known she wouldn't believe me. I didn't exactly blame her. It didn't really sound real. I didn't want to lie to her, though. Truth is, I've been having really bad dreams and can't sleep. What kind of dreams? Sexy vampire dreams? She wiggled her eyebrows. God, I wished. No, Savannah, I'm serious. I keep dreaming of death. She looked concerned. What do you think it means? I dropped my book onto the restroom counter and turned toward the mirror. I don't know. That I'm afraid of something? Oh, I know. Her eyes lit up. Maybe it means you need closure. You know, death is sort of an end, so you need to end something. I eyed her skeptically. And what do you suggest that's about? She raised her eyebrows and twisted her lips to the side. Your dad, Savannah stated like it was obvious. I know it sucks, but maybe you need closure from him leaving you guys. I was about to protest and tell her I'd already found closure with my father and that I couldn't care less about him than he did of me. But then I realized maybe she was onto something. Only I didn't think it was about my dad. It was obvious what it meant. If the police found Darla's killer and he was brought to justice, then they could close the case. I had to help them do that. But how? I couldn't go running to the cops and say I witnessed the murder. Not when I didn't really see anything anyway. I had to stumble upon some sort of evidence, so Jack would believe me and they'd start investigating. I remained quiet for a beat, and Savannah noticed. I'm sorry about whatever you're going through, she said. Maybe we could do a sleepover on Friday night. I'll help scare off your nightmares. She growled playfully and lifted her hands like they were claws. I laughed. Thanks, I told her. A sleepover sounds great. Savannah gave me a hug. Then we went our separate ways to first period. As soon as I took my seat in class, I heard someone speak Darla's name. Without turning my head, I focused my attention across the room and on the voice. She ran away, the girl said. Darla Baxter? A guy asked. I don't believe it. I thought she was just out sick. What does a girl like that have to run away from? She's popular and basically has everything anyone could ever dream of. I heard it was a secret boyfriend, another girl interjected. She ran away with him. It's not the first time she's done this either, the first girl said. My cousin lives next door to the Baxters, and he told me last summer she ran away and was gone for a week. Her dad was apparently really pissed and made this huge scene on the front lawn when he found out. My heart rate quickened. What if Darla had intended to run away, like Jack said, but she never made it that far? What if the boyfriend they were talking about convinced her to run away with him, but he killed her on the bluff before they ever left town? By the next day, he could have been long gone, and no one would know because he was a secret boyfriend. But if he was secret, how did anyone know about him at all? I may not have the answers, but I knew one thing for certain. I had to find out what really happened to Darla Baxter before someone else got hurt. Chapter 6. When I arrived home that night, I flung on the closest running gear I could find and threw my hair up into a ponytail. I headed straight toward the bluff, bypassing most of the houses and the creepy cemetery on the way. I slowed as I reached the clearing. I had some time before the last few rays of sunlight faded, so I pushed through the trees in search of some sort of clue. I strayed off the path and combed through the underbrush. Stray red leaves had me spotting blood where there wasn't any. Upturned patches of brush made me wonder if this was the way the killer had dragged her. I was no tracker, but the patches of displaced leaves looked awfully similar to the ones I was leaving behind. They must have been from people like me walking off the trails. Eventually, I crossed one of the walking trails and followed it back to the park. I wandered back to the bush of death. I slowed as I neared it, taking one last good look around. That's when I spotted it. There were lots of rocks around. The road and the parking lot were gravel. But one larger rock stuck out to me, lying in the grass 10 yards or so from the bush of death. It was the right size. I inched closer to it, my heart hammering. Could this be the murder weapon? Just as I leaned down to grab it, a voice cut through the silence. Kai. I sprang to my feet and whirled around to face him. Collin Baxter stood a few yards from me. He was dressed in running shorts, like me, with a gray t-shirt that was a little too tight on him. It showed off his muscles, though, and it looked good. What were you doing? He asked. I bit my lip. I couldn't answer with, looking for clues on your sister's murder. Taking a break, it's the halfway point on my run. I was surprised at how even my voice sounded. What's that? He sank to the ground and crossed his legs on the grass, right in front of the bush of death. I shifted in front of the rock. What's what? That rock. He pointed. I glanced behind me like I had no idea what he was talking about, but I'd already been caught. Oh, that, nothing. I just saw it and thought it looked cool. Now that I'm up close, it's not as cool as I thought. Can I see it? Collin held out his hand. It's not that cool, I insisted. I hadn't truly had a chance to inspect it. What if his sister's blood was on it? Come on, I want to see it, he pressed. I turned to swoop up the rock and quickly flipped it over in my hands. No sign of blood. My racing heart slowed and I handed it to him. He shrugged as he studied it. It is kind of a cool rock. I sat beside him, careful to keep a generous distance from the bush of death. In the silence, I noticed how dark it was getting. Collin continued to flip the rock around in his hands, and although it truly wasn't an interesting rock, he seemed oddly intrigued by it. He probably needed something to occupy his hands and his gaze. As he inspected the rock, I subtly examined his face. His lips were turned down, and his brows were pulled together tightly. I was about to say something when Collin spoke. Why'd you run away from me yesterday? What was he talking about? I hadn't run away from him. I'd been running from... Oh, realization struck. I had run away from him. I thought I'd been running from some crazy killer. I didn't realize it was you, I said. He raised his brows. Who'd you think it was? You ran away awfully fast. I didn't run away that fast, I defended. You could have caught up to me if you wanted to. You were always the fastest runner on the team. His brown eyes flicked to mine before turning to stare at the grass. Why'd you quit cross-country? I got a job, I replied, like that explained everything. Right, the grocery store. That sounds like fun, he smirked. I nudged his shoulder with mine. Are you making fun of me? Me? Never, he teased. What are you doing up here? I asked. Collin's eyes met mine. The same thing you're doing. Oh God, he's looking for his sister's murderer. No, wait, that can't be it. How could he know that's what I was doing? I forced myself to swallow. What do you mean? Running. You were running, right? I quickly relaxed. Yeah, right, I was. But don't you get enough of that at practice? Collin gave a slight laugh. Not really. I could run forever if I had the chance. I know what you mean, I scoffed. I want to get out of this town. I want to travel someday. My real dream is to go on an adventure where I can see and experience all the world has to offer. He chuckled. Sounds like fun. Can I come with? It was meant as a joke, but I found my stomach flip-flopping in my abdomen. Most people heard I wanted to travel and told me it was too unrealistic. They said I had to settle down and get a real job because I'd never have the money to do what I wanted. You want to see the world? I asked. Someday, Collin said, staring off into the distance. I don't really know what I want to do after high school. I figured I'd go to college and major in psychology or something like that, but I'm not sure if that's my dream or my sister's. She's always said she wants to become a therapist. My heart sank at the mention of her. What would you do if you could do anything? I don't know if that's something I can figure out here in Amberg, Collin admitted. I've got almost 2 years left before I can leave because I'm a minor. If I left now, they'd drag me back home the first chance they got. I don't really blame Darla for running away. I'd literally run away too if I thought I could. I averted my gaze and began pulling at strands of grass. I heard. I don't know what to think. Collin rested his arms across his knees. Join the club. How do you know for sure she ran away? She could have... I immediately locked my lips together when I realized I almost said she could have died. Something else could have happened to her. He shook his head, his gaze still locked on something far away. She left a note. My eyebrow shot up. That must have been the evidence Jack had, and why he'd been so insistent that Darla wasn't missing. So, she really did run off with a secret boyfriend? I guess so. I never heard her talk about a guy, but if he was really secret, I don't think she'd tell her little brother about it. Why isn't anyone out there looking for her? I wondered. Collin shrugged. Because she's 18 and can do whatever she wants. She did the same thing last year and came home in under a week. Dad's sure that's what will happen this time. My hands began to tremble. I shoved them between my knees to steady them. I heard something about that. Why'd she run away last time? Stupid drama, he answered. She's had a rough year ever since her boyfriend broke up with her. Her boyfriend? Sean Cameron. As far as I knew, she wasn't involved with anyone since him, but I guess I don't know my sister as well as I thought. What kind of drama was it? I asked. Collin shifted on the grass. It was stupid stuff, like wearing the same dress as the homecoming queen. She had sort of a falling out with half of her friends last year. She didn't really talk about it. All I know is she ran away that time, and now she's done it again. Except she never made it out of Amberg, I thought, which only made me want to hurl. Maybe that's why she kept her boyfriend secret, I theorized. Maybe she was still hurt about her breakup with Sean and thought she needed someone to comfort her, but wasn't confident in their relationship. Collin shrugged. I guess that makes sense, but why hasn't she come home yet? She hasn't called or anything, and when I tried to call her, it went straight to voicemail. I bet Tiana couldn't get a hold of her either, and that's why she hadn't given me an update. She'd promised to call and check up on her. Last time she ran away, it was like we barely had a chance to worry before she was back, Collin said. I thought you said she'd been gone for a week last time. Collin fixed his eyes back on the rock he was rolling between his hands. It was more like 4 days. I know it hasn't been that long yet, but this time, it feels like a lot longer. I can't explain it. Maybe I'd been focusing on the wrong things in my investigation. If I couldn't find evidence at the crime scene, then maybe I could help by finding out who this guy she ran off with was. If he was dangerous, the police would take her runaway more seriously and treat it like a kidnapping. You're sure she ran away with him? I asked. If she didn't run away with him, then what happened to her? She left her car at home. It only makes sense that he picked her up and they took off together. And her note mentioned him. He gave an involuntary shudder. You really care about your sister, I said, though it was obvious. His soft brown eyes met my gaze, sending my heart fluttering. You wouldn't think that if you had talked to me last week. Darla and I had our good times, but we fought a lot too. I get what you mean, I told him. I have a younger brother. We fight all the time. Doesn't that suck? He asked without looking at me. Families are the worst, but you can't help but love them to death because they're your family. It seems all my dad and I do is fight. He's always yelling, but I mean, he'll always be my dad. Even with how hard things have been this week, I'll always love him. My dad may say he doesn't care about what Darla does with her life, but I can tell he's worried too. He's really mad at Darla for running away, but he's been taking it out on me, you know? My heart stalled, imagining the worst. What do you mean? It's stupid stuff, like yelling at me to do my chores while I'm doing them, or flipping out because the neighbor's leaves blew into our yard. Like they can help that. My heart rate returned to normal. Why doesn't he report her missing? Collin frowned. I don't know if she's technically missing. I just hope she's happy wherever she ran off to. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I didn't want to hurt Collin more than he was already hurting, so I opted to change the subject. Have you ever run away? Collin scoffed. I wish. You? I bit the inside of my lip and nodded nervously. Collin shifted to rest his hands behind him on the grass. When I finally looked at him, a half smile had formed across his face. Do tell. It's silly, really, I started. I recalled the first time I ran away. I didn't really, because it was in my spirit form. But something about escaping to my grandma's after hearing my parents discuss their divorce felt rebellious. I told my parents I had run away, but it was obvious that I'd been in my bed the whole time. When my grandma died a month later, I felt the urge to get away the same way I had in my dreams. Back then, I still didn't know how to control my gift, and truth be told, I wanted my parents to notice this time. I sighed. I was 12 years old and stupid. My parents were going through a divorce, and my grandma had just died. She was one of my favorite people in the world. Collin nodded like he understood. I don't know. I started running. I hid under the bridge outside of town for a couple of hours until the police found me. I told my parents I'd been kidnapped. I don't know why. I guess I thought they might get back together if they thought I'd been in real trouble. I paused for a long moment. Obviously, they didn't buy it. Collin's laugh cut through the quietness that had settled over the bluff. I couldn't help it when a smile twitched at my own lips. What's so funny? You've got balls, I'll give you that. When my mom left us, all I could do was cry. Suddenly, his tone became soft. Even when my dad told me I was being weak, I couldn't stop crying. I'm sorry, I said gently. Collin shook his head. You have nothing to be sorry about. I was 8. My dad could have at least acted like he cared. Sometimes I'm not convinced our parents know how to show that, I admitted. He scoffed. You can say that again. I never realized how much Collin and I had in common. It was really easy to talk to him. It's getting dark and you look cold. He gestured to the goosebumps I hadn't realized had surfaced on my arms. We should probably be getting home. You're right. I rose from my seated position. Let me walk you home. A smile crept across Collin's face. I'd like that. I followed alongside Collin. Neither of us spoke, but he began to increase his pace until we were jogging side by side. I hadn't had a running partner in a long time. It was nice. We passed the creepy cemetery, then reached a more populous part of town where street lamps lit our route. I kept up with Collin easily, and I suspected he'd chosen this pace for my benefit. He'd always been a faster runner than me. It didn't matter the pace, though. Just feeling my feet move under me was excitement enough. My feet grew happier the more we pushed along, and my legs cheered in joy at the sensation of the workout. Something about it all felt more satisfying with Collin beside me. The cold air didn't even register on my skin as we ran. All too soon, we slowed, and Collin stopped in front of a pretty house. The houses on this block seemed elaborate to me, much in contrast to my home. They were generously spaced, giving each homeowner plenty of land for a backyard pool. At least, I suspected something like that lay behind the 2-story brick beauty. The lawn was gorgeously landscaped and had been well maintained. We hadn't even raked our leaves this year, which made our house look like a total dump in comparison. I imagined the interior was even more handsome than the lawn. Collin turned to me on the sidewalk and ran his fingers through his hair. Thanks for walking me home. It wasn't much of a walk, I teased. My pulsing heart rate served as a reminder of our run. Collin let out a puff of air that sounded like a laugh. Well, if you're like me, you'd rather run than walk. Was I correct in assuming that? I didn't even have to think about it. I'd always enjoyed running. There was just something about it that filled me with a sense of happiness and pride each time I completed a workout. You were right. I'll see you tomorrow at school? He said it like it was a question, like he was hoping we'd meet up at some point. My heart fluttered at the thought. Before I could answer, a deep voice cut through the momentary silence. Collin! We both jerked our eyes toward the door where the voice had come from. A tall man with dark hair stood on the steps and held the door open. The front light on the house illuminated his features. He looked a lot like Collin, except his jaw was squarer and his eyes were filled with darker emotions. I had no doubt this was the dick father Collin had told me about. Get your ass in here, boy, he shouted from across the lawn. An uncomfortable sensation settled over me. His father didn't seem very kind. Sorry, I have to go, Collin apologized quietly to me. It was really good talking to you again. Maybe you'll decide to join us for cross-country again next year. My mouth hung open slightly as I searched for the right words. Collin, I know, your job, but there's only one season left after this one for us. And you have the rest of your life to work and travel and all that. You shouldn't let the good stuff like this pass you by. I'll try not to, I told him, but I wasn't sure how much truth there was to that statement. Thanks for keeping me company, Collin said before he ran off toward the door. His dad grabbed him by the back of the neck and practically shoved him inside. What the hell did I tell you? No more running after dark. And who's that girl you're with? The door fell closed behind both of them before I caught an answer. I shuddered. I didn't like the way his dad treated him. I rushed off toward the other side of town, led only by the light from the street lamps. Our conversation on the bluff replayed through my mind. I tried to come up with theories. Maybe Darla's boyfriend was a serial killer who preyed on young girls he met on the internet. Maybe Darla had been pregnant and her boyfriend killed her because he was furious and didn't want the baby. Maybe he was married and Darla had threatened to come clean about their affair and he couldn't let his wife find out. Only, why would she run away with him if she knew he was dangerous? Unless he wasn't. I mean, how could a guy you love and trust turn around and kill you? That's the type of guy you should be running from, not toward. To say it hit me like a ton of bricks would be an understatement. No, the realization that followed was much more intense. Maybe she was running from her killer. What if Darla was running away from her father? I'd seen the guy yell at his own son over nothing. The guy was clearly a jerk, but was he capable of murder? And murdering his own daughter nonetheless? I mulled over the theory, and it made too much sense. Darla must have hated her father and found a guy who she felt comfortable with, who would keep her safe. She probably met him on the internet and kept him a secret so her dad wouldn't find out. The only problem was that she still had a special place in her heart for her family, and she left a note to keep them from worrying or searching for her. But before she could make it out of town, her dad found the note and followed her to the bluff where she was meeting her boyfriend, and he killed her out of rage. The thought chilled me to the very core, because that meant Collin was living with a murderer, and I feared for his safety. After everything Collin had said, one thing became very clear. What I'd seen had been real, and it was time I told someone about it. Chapter 7. I returned home and heard Jack's voice before I saw him. When I caught a glimpse of him at my kitchen stove, I immediately froze. Were Jack and my mom preparing a home-cooked meal? This couldn't be happening. Mom hadn't cooked us a proper meal in what felt like ages. What was she doing cooking with Jack? Did this mean they were together? Oh God, no. Please don't let that be true. I didn't even want to know what they were doing. First, she was cutting his hair, and now they were cooking together. All the things that she was supposed to do with me. My mother's laughter died down when she noticed me. Kai, how was your run? I forced myself to continue breathing. It was like my mother had been replaced with some alien look-alike who knew how to cook. It was fine, I finally answered. What are we having? Oh, this? My mom held up flour-coated fingers and gestured to a ball of dough on the counter. This isn't for supper. This is for Jack's family. Don't be silly, Lisa, he interjected while rolling up a sleeve before plunging his hands into the flour. Ew, stop getting your germs over my family's food. We can leave some of the pie here for you, Jack offered. Pie? I asked slowly, still frozen in place. Mom, what's going on? My mom rarely cooked for us. What was she doing making a homemade pie for Jack's family? Stop looking at me like I'm an alien who replaced your mother, she joked, far too cheerfully. Oh my God, how did she know that's what I was thinking? Maybe she is an alien. I'm just teaching Jack some cooking tricks so he can cook for his family this Thanksgiving, Mom said. It's his first time hosting. Okay, I said, like I totally understood, but I didn't. Why was it that Mom never had time to teach me how to cook? I turned my attention away from her. A warm pizza sat on the counter, and Brayden was at the table chewing on pizza slices. I grabbed a plate and dished up a few pieces. Thanks for supper, I told my mom. You can thank me, Brayden said with a smirk. I'm the one who made it. I furrowed my brow. Wasn't that my mom's job? She could take all the time to cook with Jack, but she still made Brayden cook dinner? I was kind of irritated at her. I offered Brayden a kind smile. Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's nice of you to cook for us all the time. I stole a glance at my mother, hoping she would catch the edge to my tone that implied that I didn't think he should be doing all the cooking. She didn't seem to notice. Thanks, Brayden said. Stop being so weird. After a few bites of my pizza and an extended silence, I spoke again. Hey, Mom, I'm going to stay the night at Savannah's on Friday after dress rehearsal. My mother let out a breath of air. I wish you would ask me first. I stopped chewing. I did just ask you. No, you told me. What's the difference? Kai, she scolded in a voice that caught me by surprise. I'm your mother. I wish you would respect me like I was. Oh no, she did not just go there. If we wanted to talk about respect, let's talk about how she respected me as a daughter, always taking my money without paying me back, and suddenly dating a guy she didn't even bother to tell me about, or for that matter, ask if I was comfortable with. I didn't say any of this. Jack was here, and it wasn't the time to get into a fight with my mom. I finished my pizza and waited until my mom and Jack put the pie in the oven. Jack, can we talk? I asked. Sure, he agreed. My mother seemed to be paying no attention while she cleaned up their cooking mess. I led Jack outside onto the deck. I crossed my arms and leaned against the railing. I'm worried Darla Baxter didn't run away. Here we go. I think she might have been murdered, I spat out. Jack took a step back. Whoa, Kai, that's a serious accusation. Where'd you hear that? I shrugged and forced myself to lie. I heard a rumor going around at school. Jack relaxed. It's just a silly rumor. What's so silly about it? I asked. No one has heard from her in days. Everyone's talking about this secret boyfriend she has. Who's to say he didn't lure her out of the house only to murder her? He could have made her leave a note so no one would think to look for her for a while. Jack tilted his head. How did you know she left a note? Her brother told me. So will the police investigate? I held my breath in anticipation. Jack shook his head. There's nothing we can do. There's no evidence to support this rumor, which means there's nothing to investigate. Unless you know something. How could I possibly explain this in a way he would believe? Explanations ran through my head. Maybe I could say I went on a late-night run, or that I fell asleep on the bluff and woke to a scream. Except none of that made any sense because my family knew I was home at that exact time. I'm telling you what I know, I said desperately. Collin can't get a hold of her. Something bad happened. I know it. Aren't you concerned? Jack sighed like there was no way to explain it to me, like I was too young to understand. I was 16 for heaven's sake. She's 18. He said it like that should explain everything. And don't adults have rights too? Why are you so worried about her? Jack asked. Because no one knows where she is? I replied in a snarky tone. He was really getting on my nerves. It was like he didn't care. Jack shifted to face me more directly. Isn't that the point of running away? Besides, she's done it before. We launched an investigation then, and she came running back home practically before the investigation started. So you're treating her like the girl who cried wolf? Jack glared at me, and I knew without having to read his mind exactly what he was thinking. No, Kai, you're the girl who cried wolf. That's when I realized it wasn't that he didn't worry about Darla. The fact is, he didn't trust me. He never believed me after I ran away and he found me under that bridge, claiming I'd been kidnapped. But this wasn't about me. So you're not even going to help her? Or worry about her? I demanded. I didn't say I wasn't worried. To run away like that, you could really get yourself hurt. You have no idea, I thought. That doesn't mean we can investigate. There are legal matters involved with stuff like this. Her family hasn't filed a missing person report. That's because her dad thinks she's going to come running back in a week like last time. That's what Collin told me. And I'm sure that's exactly what will happen, Jack insisted. You don't understand, I pressed. What if her dad isn't filing the report because he doesn't want anyone to investigate? What if he hurt her? Kai, you can't go throwing around accusations like that, Jack stated sternly. A rumor like that could ruin this family, and they're going through enough as it is. Until there's further evidence to the contrary, there's no case here. I could hear it in his tone. This was the end of the conversation. It was clear Jack wasn't going to trust my judgment. He really did think of me as the girl who cried wolf. Clearly, I wasn't very trustworthy when I was 12, and he still thought I was that same silly young girl. Jack began to head back inside, but stopped at the door and turned back to me. Your play is on Saturday, right? I didn't bother mentioning that it wasn't my play. I wasn't even in it. I simply nodded. Yeah. I'll have to check it out. I'll be there. I knew he was just saying that to leave the conversation on a high note and make me feel better. But it did nothing of the sort. Jack hadn't believed a word I said. If the police weren't going to catch this killer, then I was going to have to find him myself. Chapter 8. Every muscle in my body tensed as I watched the school halls for Collin the next day, but I didn't spot him. We didn't have very many classes together, but I'd seen him in the library during my study hall before. I checked out of my study hall room and entered the library, where I found him sitting alone at one of the study tables. I slid into the seat across from him. He looked up from his textbook, his brown hair falling into his eyes. Hey, Kai, what's up? I didn't know how to start the conversation on my mind. You're safe at home, aren't you? I blurted. Collin's brow furrowed. Then his eyes widened in realization. Oh, my God, my dad freaked you out, didn't he? A bit, I admitted. It's nothing like that, he said quickly. I'm safe, I promise. The tension in my shoulders eased slightly, but it wasn't enough to convince me. I didn't want him around his dad if he was dangerous, but I didn't know how to help if Jack wasn't going to take me seriously. That's good to hear, I said. Do you want to come to my house for dinner tonight after cross-country practice? It was the least I could do to keep him away from his dad for a few hours. Collin eyed me curiously. What, like a date? My cheeks flamed. Well, my family will be there, so I don't think it counts. It sounds fun, he said with a smile. What are we having? The best thing I could think of. Nachos. The doorbell rang just as I finished shoving the rest of Braden's crap into the cabinets under the TV. Gaming controllers and other items had scattered the floor just moments ago. I'd only had a few minutes to clean up after work, but Collin didn't need to see how untidy my house normally was. I rushed to the door and took a deep, calming breath before opening it. Seeing Collin standing on my porch seemed so surreal, like he didn't quite fit into my personal life. Collin? I smiled. Hi, Kai, he said as he stepped into my living room. Come on, the kitchen's over here. I crossed the living room and gestured for him to follow. Kai? My mom called as she walked down the hall. Who was at the door? Her words trailed off when she saw Collin standing in the kitchen. I told her I invited a friend over for dinner, but I didn't tell her it was a boy. He so didn't fit in here. His long, toned legs left him towering at 6 foot, and the brown hair that fell into his dark eyes contrasted against my family's pale complexion. Mom and Braden had blonde hair and blue eyes, while I had red hair and green eyes, and none of us were exactly tall at 5'6". His jeans looked as if they'd been pressed, and they were in perfect condition without a single hole or fray. My family usually wore t-shirts, while Collin wore an untucked button-down shirt with casual rolled-up sleeves. I thought it was kind of hot. So this is the friend you told me was coming over? she teased, before turning to Collin. Hi, I'm Lisa. He shook my mom's hand, and I nearly fell over in embarrassment. I'd never brought a guy home before. Braden emerged from his bedroom just then to see what all the commotion was about. Don't do it, I silently pleaded, shooting Braden a glance. He ignored me. Are you Kai's boyfriend? Dear God. No, Braden, he's just a friend, I said quickly. And we're making dinner together, so if you don't mind, we could use some space in the kitchen. What are you making? Braden asked. He stepped around the counter, crowding the kitchen. Nachos, Collin answered before I could tell Braden to bug off. Want to help? I shot Collin a glance to let him know I didn't want Braden's help, but he didn't catch it. Nah, it's okay, Braden said. I cook all the time. I think it's Kai's turn. I pursed my lips and glared at Braden, but he ignored me. Braden, my mom said, gripping his shoulders and leading him out of the kitchen. Let's give them some space. Thanks for making dinner, Kai. No problem, I breathed, relieved that my family had left us alone. I started gathering the ingredients together. Collin shoved his hands into his pockets. Your family's nice. I nearly choked on my laugh. They're something. Collin gave a nervous chuckle, running his fingers through the ends of his hair. I get it. No one likes their own family. That's not true, I defended. I like them. I just get annoyed sometimes. I didn't want to talk about my family, though. I laid ingredients out on the counter, then grabbed the can of olives. I'll fry the meat and you can cut up olives. Deal, he said. We got to work preparing dinner, making small talk while we cooked. Collin was almost finished slicing the olives when he jumped and gave a little yelp. What is it? I asked in alarm. There's a spider. He pointed to a small black spider scurrying across the floor. I shied away into the corner of the kitchen. I hate spiders. Me too, Collin agreed. Braden was playing video games in the living room. He sighed heavily and stomped into the kitchen. Would you two stop acting like babies? It's just a little spider. Braden stomped the spider a few times, then walked off like it had never been there in the first place. Collin and I exchanged a glance before we burst out laughing together. I can't claim he's too annoying when he saves me from spiders, can I? I joked. Collin gave a shudder, but there was a hint of a smile on his lips. He just saved our lives. I snickered. I take it you don't like any creepy crawlies? Collin made a face and stuck his tongue out. No way. I won't even watch movies that have anything to do with them. I can't do horror movies and stuff like that. I prefer comedies, I told him. Same, he agreed. After a beat, he asked, So, what are we making for dessert? Let me check what we have. I set my spatula aside and opened the freezer. I found a tub of chocolate ice cream, but there wasn't much left. All we have is this. Personally, I prefer vanilla with caramel on top. Collin smirked. That's my favorite too. Next time you come over for dinner, we'll have to buy a tub of vanilla, I offered, before I realized what I'd done. I'd just invited him over to my house a second time. Like a date. That sounds great, Collin said. I'd known Collin since elementary school, but I never really knew him. We spent the next half hour laughing in my kitchen and telling jokes. When Collin finished chopping the lettuce, he balled the plastic wrap up and aimed it for the trash can. He missed and I laughed. One of Collin's brows shot up. You think you could do better? I'm not sure. Collin picked up the ball of plastic and placed it in my hands. Come on, show me what you've got. Please don't laugh, I begged as I tossed the wrapper. The shot was way to the right, but the wrapper bounced off the fridge and landed square in the trash can. My fist shot up in victory. Yes! Collin raised his brows. Maybe you should join the basketball team. I snorted. That was a lucky shot. I'd rather do cross-country. My eyes locked on his, and my cheeks flushed. I quickly turned away and called down the hall to my family. Dinner! Braden put in a movie while we ate. A comedy, thankfully. Collin and I sat on the love seat, but we both practically hugged our own armrests. I wanted to scoot closer to him, but I couldn't work up the courage. I wasn't surprised that my mom didn't stick around for the whole thing. Once the credits started rolling, Braden escaped back into his bedroom, leaving Collin and me alone in the living room. I shifted nervously on the couch. I glanced at the clock and then out the window. It's pretty late. I heard your dad say he didn't want you out after dark. Is that your curfew? I can stay out, Collin said. He just doesn't want me running in the dark. He's scared I'm going to get hurt. I don't know if you know my stats this year, but I've slowed down a bit. I didn't know that. He was always the fastest one on the team. What do you mean? It was a couple of months ago. I had just started running outside again when the weather got warmer. I was running at night up around the bluff. There's not a lot of light up there, and I didn't bring a headlamp. I tripped over a root on the path and did a lot of damage to the muscles and tendons in my ankle. It cost my dad a ton in physical therapy so I could run again for the cross-country season. I'm not as good as I was before. My dad doesn't want me running at night because he's afraid I'll hurt myself. That sounded like a dad who cared, not one who would murder his own daughter. I'm sorry, I had no idea, I said. It was my fault. But I've fallen behind a lot of the other runners. I'm not the fastest on the team anymore. That's one of the reasons I run after practice. I feel like I need the extra training if I'm ever going to be as good as I used to be. Now it made sense why he seemed slower than I remembered when we ran together. It will get better, I assured him. I'm sure it will, he agreed. Maybe we should run together more. You might be faster than me now. He winked, sending my heart fluttering. I let out a light laugh. I doubt that, but I'm up for a challenge. He extended his hand. Deal. It was strange reconnecting with Collin, because I'd never known him that well. But when I was talking to him, it felt like we'd been friends forever. Now I was inviting him over to my house a second time, and we were making plans to challenge each other to a race. Does this mean we're friends? I asked playfully. Collin smiled. Definitely. Then you have a deal. I took his hand to shake it, and tingles spread up my arm. In that moment, I couldn't help but think I wanted to be something more. Chapter 9. I didn't want to sleep that night. I was afraid to relive the frightening scene of Darla's murder again, but I couldn't fight the fatigue any longer. I fell asleep and witnessed the horror once again in my nightmares. I awoke late and was almost late to school. I arrived just before the final bell rang. I didn't see Savannah until lunch. We fell into step beside each other as we headed to the lunchroom. Sean passed my locker between second and third period. Did you see? She raved. I shook my head. My second and third period classes were across the hall from each other, so I didn't go back to my locker between them. It was like a scene straight from a high school chick flick, she continued. I could practically see the scene as if I'd witnessed it. In my mind, Savannah's back was pressed against the locker while she twisted a strand of blue-tipped hair around her finger and stared dreamily into Sean's eyes, his body too close for my liking. And then he kissed me, Savannah gushed. Right there in the middle of the hall. I audibly gasped. Did you get in trouble? None of the teachers saw. Sounds romantic, I said when we reached the end of the lunch line. Savannah stood on her toes, and her eyes fixed toward the front of the line. She scrunched her face up. Yuck, the school's serving spaghetti. Their sauce is gross. I second that. A deep voice from behind me agreed. I turned to find Collin standing there. Want to go off campus? He asked. My stomach flip-flopped in my abdomen. He was asking me out to eat? Like on a date? Sounds tasty, Savannah answered before I could. Oh, right. He was inviting both of us. Where do you want to go? I asked. He smiled. Best place in town. 5 minutes later, we were standing in line at Amberg Hamburger. The place was packed, thanks to being the only decent place in town to eat. And no doubt thanks in part to Spaghetti Day. Is it weird that Collin asked us to lunch? Savannah whispered while Collin placed his order. We've kind of reconnected, I admitted. I ran into him at Eagle Park on my run earlier this week, and he came over to my house last night for dinner. Savannah wiggled her eyebrows. Ooh, I swatted at her. Stop it, it's not like that. We ordered, then made our way outside, where there were plenty of empty tables to choose from. Despite the nice weather, most students had stayed indoors for lunch. We took a seat next to a raised concrete flower bed that separated the eating area from the sidewalk. Feels like a good day for a run, Collin said while taking a deep breath of fresh air. I agreed before eagerly biting into my burger. Speaking of running, Savannah started, what happened to your sister running away? Savannah! I practically choked. No, it's okay, Collin assured me. A lot of people have been asking me that. The honest truth is that I really don't know. I didn't really want to talk about it at first, which is why everyone thought she was out sick on Monday. Then a couple of her friends asked me where she was. Honestly, I thought they'd know something I didn't. But she didn't even tell them she was leaving. I mean, maybe she wasn't as close to them as I thought. I know she cut a lot of people off last year with her friends falling out. He'd mentioned that before, but hadn't gone into detail. What was all that about? I wondered. He let out a long sigh. Last year at homecoming, she was wearing the same dress as the homecoming queen. You know how the kids at our school have this tradition of blindfolding and locking the king and queen up in a closet at the after party? I nodded, recalling the gossip that was going around after the homecoming dance this year, how Anna didn't want to go into the closet with Hunter. Last year my sister was mistaken for the homecoming queen, and they blindfolded her, Collin continued. No one noticed because they were wearing the same dress, and they both had dark hair. So that's why the whole thing with Anna and Hunter sounded familiar to me. I had heard bits of this story before, but I hadn't realized Darla was in the middle of the drama last year. Why did her friends ditch her? I asked. Collin shrugged. She didn't really talk about it. I guess Sean got mad because she made out with another guy, and then all her friends took his side. They thought she was a cheater, but that wasn't really it. What do you mean? Savannah asked. Darla was really broken up about Sean leaving her, and I don't think she would have risked their relationship, he said. She really loved him. I think it was an honest mistake putting her in the closet with the homecoming king, and I think her friends just wouldn't listen to her when she tried to explain that. So, she didn't even do anything with the homecoming king? I asked. I can't say for sure, he admitted. I wasn't there and she didn't talk about it. I just wish she had someone she was close enough with to contact. It's like she doesn't want anyone knowing if she's safe or not. I swallowed hard without fully chewing my food. It did nothing to relieve the lump forming in my throat. This had gone on too long. Collin deserved to know what really happened. He could be living with a murderer. And if his dad could so easily kill his own daughter, what would stop him from killing his son if he stepped out of line? I'm sorry to hear that, Savannah told him. If you don't know what happened, then who does? Logically, I couldn't explain what I knew, which was why I was just about as shocked as anyone when I heard the next words come out of my mouth. I do. Savannah spat her soda across the table the same moment Collin stopped chewing. Her eyes nearly bulged out of her head. What do you mean you know what happened to her? Savannah demanded. Well, I don't know exactly, but I have some theories, I said. Savannah hadn't believed me last time, so I was going to have to work with half-truths again. Kai. Savannah eyed me seriously from across the table. What did you hear? She thought I knew what happened to Darla because of gossip. I could work with that. I glanced around quickly, but the only other group of students were seated at the farthest table away, while the rest were packed inside. I lowered my voice anyway. Darla was murdered at Eagle Park after the homecoming dance. Time seemed to stop. They both went silent, and Collin's features paled. I wasn't sure he believed me. Savannah leaned in closer. Where did you hear this? Last time I'd tried to tell her about my ability to astral travel, she'd nearly called me crazy. I had to give her something she'd believe. I was in the bathroom earlier when I heard these two girls come in. They didn't know I was there, and they started talking about how they heard this rumor. The one told the other that it was secret, that not a lot of people knew. Savannah and Collin were eating up my lie, while I was stunned that my story sounded so believable. My English teachers had always told me I had a way with stories. I guess that made sense considering the lies I'd made up over the years. Who are the girls? Savannah asked. I shrugged. I have no idea. I didn't see them because I was in the stall. Collin leaned back in his chair, looking visibly agitated. Just because it's a rumor doesn't mean it's true. He didn't want to believe it. That much was obvious. I took in a deep breath, but it did little to calm my shaking fingers. I slid them into my hoodie sleeves and shoved them between my knees. But what if this time it is? Collin shook his head, like he was trying to process the information. I knew something bad happened to her, worse than running away. She would have called by now. Maybe not me, but at least one of her friends. You believe it? I asked hopefully. I have to, he said. It's the only thing that makes sense. I know Darla. Last time she was gone, she changed afterward. I can't really explain how, but I knew she wouldn't run away again. Are you sure she wouldn't? Savannah asked uncertainly. I mean, stuff like that doesn't happen in a small town like this. Did you hear the girls say anything else? Like, who did it? I shook my head. There are theories. Collin sat up straighter. What are the theories? The first theory is that her boyfriend killed her, I said. The boyfriend no one has ever heard of? Collin asked, like he didn't believe there actually was one. Well, her note said she was running away with him, didn't it? Collin nodded. Yeah, it did. Did you hear anything else? My breathing wavered. It sounded silly to say it out loud, but it made so much sense in my head. Another theory is that your dad did it. I tried to assess his reaction, but his features were impossible to read. That's not possible, he finally said. I know it sounds far-fetched, but what if he found her note and then killed her before she could get out of town? I asked. What if he was that mad at her for trying to leave? Kai, listen to what you're saying, Collin pressed. Sure, my dad is pissed at Darla, but he's not a killer. Then why won't he file a missing persons report? I pressed. It sure sounded like his dad was hiding something. Collin leaned in and lowered his voice. Look, my dad is an ass, but he isn't a killer. I told him we should go down to the police station and file a missing persons report, but he's all like, your sister isn't missing. She's an adult who can do whatever she wants. The words sounded all too familiar, like what Jack had said to me. Collin let out a puff of air and ran his fingers through his brown hair. I think he's just trying to see how long Darla will stay away this time. Only I'm afraid she'll never come back. He thinks he's teaching Darla a lesson. He thinks that if she's out in the real world for a week or two, she'll realize how immature she's being and come back home. That's a lot easier to believe than he killed her, isn't it? I guess when he put it that way, it made sense, especially if his dad truly thought she was still alive. But I still couldn't shake my suspicions of him. Doesn't mean she wasn't killed, Collin added. And a chill spread down my spine. She didn't take anything with her. I've checked her room, and I know my sister well enough to know what she would and wouldn't leave behind. My sister was into snow globes. She had a huge collection. There was this one that was really special to her that she got from my mom when she was little. When she was gone for 4 days last year, she took it with her. It's the one thing she wouldn't leave behind if she was going somewhere. But she left it behind. My dad doesn't seem to notice. He says it's just a stupid snow globe. Collin let out another sigh. But to say my dad killed her, that's just stepping over the line. He isn't a killer. The serious look in Collin's eyes told me that I was completely wrong to suspect his father. Trust me, he insisted. And I did. I didn't exactly trust his father, but I trusted Collin's judgment. In that moment, I was just about as certain as he was that his father didn't do it. I'm sorry I suggested it, I told him honestly. It wasn't my dad, but if any of this is true, we have to do something for my sister, Collin insisted. I agree, Savannah whispered from next to me. We should go to the police. They aren't going to believe us, I said. My mom is friends with Officer Delaney, and he swears she ran away. We can't go to them without some evidence. If the police won't listen to us, then I guess there's only one thing we can do, Collin said. If we're going to figure out what happened to my sister, we have to do it on our own. Will you guys help me? Chapter 10. We agreed to meet at the Bluff on Saturday morning, so we'd have enough daylight to search for clues. I was off work for dress rehearsal on Friday. I spent the evening rushing from one side of the stage to the other. Lindsay had helped me with costume changes when I wasn't moving pieces of the set. During long scenes, I sat by Tyler while he taught me the basics of how he managed the lights and sound. Savannah sat next to me when she wasn't on stage, which was most of the time because she was only in 2 scenes. Even though Mr. Spears insisted we were going to do the whole thing without stopping, he paused a couple of times, mostly to chew out students who were goofing off backstage and causing a distraction. You can't be talking backstage tomorrow night, he kept telling the cast. They eventually shut up the 3rd time he yelled at them. Then he had the actors on stage redo one scene when Tiana broke character and cursed under her breath for missing a line. I knew that line, Savannah bragged next to me. Her hair was a fresh new color, a pretty chestnut brown. You'll get the lead next year, I know you will, I assured her. Savannah was a great actress. I nearly forgot I was supposed to help Tiana into her Cinderella ball gown until she started calling my name. Since it was dress rehearsal, We had to practice everything, which meant the receiving line too. "Quick," she insisted. I rushed after her into the dressing room and quickly pulled the dress off its hanger and unzipped the zipper. Tiana had already stripped off her peasant clothing. She hurried into the dress and I pulled it up over her shoulders, forgetting at first about the faulty zipper she'd pointed out to me. "Mr. Spears says we can't do this if we're not quick enough," she said. I managed to get the zipper up, and Tiana rushed out of the dressing room. We did it quick enough that Mr. Spears approved the dress for opening night. After rehearsal, I returned home to pack up my overnight bag, then walked to Savannah's house. I could see her twirling a strand of hair around her finger from her second-story window. She was holding her phone to her ear. Just as I stepped onto the lawn, her eyes caught mine, and she waved. She had already bolted to the front door before I made it up the walkway. "Hello, sweetie," Savannah greeted in her near-perfect British accent. I took my shoes off at the door and dropped my bag in the entryway. "Hi, what are you up to?" "Oh, nothing special. Just talking to my boyfriend." She tossed her brown hair over her shoulder dramatically. We passed by her parents in the living room and said hello before heading upstairs. Savannah's room looked as if a fairy had barfed on it. Lavender walls served as the backdrop to a very pink and purple color scheme. A pale purple canopy hung above her bed and sparkled with glitter when she turned on the light. The mirror at her desk was practically as tall as she was, and an extensive makeup collection occupied the entirety of the desk's surface. A plush pink area rug spread out over her floor, and a nearly identical pink mushroom chair sat in the corner. I followed her into her bedroom, where she pulled out her collection of nail polish so we could paint our nails while we talked. I sat at her vanity and carefully coated my nails in neutral pink. Sean Cameron, Sean Cameron, Sean Cameron. That's basically all I heard come out of Savannah's mouth for the next hour. "He's trying to get in your pants," I said. "Well, yeah." Savannah rolled her eyes like it was obvious. "That doesn't mean we can't have some fun and fall in love along the way." I laughed along with her, but I knew that's not truly how she felt about it. I'd been friends with her long enough to understand what she was really thinking. She knew what kind of guy Sean was, but she'd already fixed the delusion in her mind that things would be different with her. "You'll be careful, won't you?" I asked for reassurance. I wanted her to know I respected her decisions, but I didn't want her to get hurt. Savannah scoffed, like the concept of her being reckless was ludicrous. "Of course I will. You know me." She'd been careful with guys so far when it came to that kind of stuff. She was all talk and no action, but I couldn't help but wonder if Sean would be different for her. "I know, but that doesn't mean I know or trust Sean," I said. Savannah twisted her lips like she was disappointed. "You can at least trust that I have enough sense to take care of myself, right?" "I know you can," I told her. "He wants to take me out on a date," she gushed. "We're going out for food before the play starts." "That should be fun." Savannah wiggled her eyebrows. "Don't have that much fun," I joked. "Don't worry about that. But seriously, I have been dying to spend more time with him. Yay for parents and their curfews." Her tone dripped with sarcasm. "I wouldn't worry. I'm sure he's smitten by you. If some other girl wants to take your place, there's no competition." Savannah laughed. "Unless you count Tiana King in that lead role in the play." I rolled my eyes. "That's not the same thing, and I doubt Sean cares about that. I don't think Tiana's his type." "Well, they did date once," Savannah said. "But it was a long time ago, like last school year." I laughed a little. "That's not that long ago. I thought he was dating Darla last school year, though." Savannah shifted on her bed. "How do you not keep up with this kind of stuff? Those two broke up last year, and then Tiana and Sean started dating. It only lasted for 2 months or so." That must be why Tiana and Darla weren't friends anymore, like Tiana had told me. My nails finished drying. As I was putting my polish away, I noticed a cute charm hanging from the jewelry organizer on Savannah's desk. It was a shimmering clear stone in the shape of a teardrop. I'd never seen it before. "This is pretty," I said. Savannah hopped up from the bed and came up behind me. "Isn't it? Sean gave it to me. It came with a broken clasp, though. Mom promised to fix it tonight." "It's not as good as mine," I joked, pulling the crescent moon necklace away from my chest to inspect it. I had bought the necklace a couple of years ago at a flea market Savannah dragged me to. It reminded me of my astral travels, but now it only mocked the fact that I could no longer travel in my sleep. "Yours is pretty," she admitted. "Ready for the trampoline?" I definitely was. It was one of our sleepover traditions. Savannah led the way to her backyard and flipped on the patio light. I've been practicing. Watch this. Savannah climbed onto the trampoline in her socks and bounced a few times. Here I go. She bounced higher. Then her body flew backward as she pulled her legs to her chest and completed one rotation, landing perfectly on her feet before bouncing a few more times to slow her momentum. I clapped. That's awesome. You try, she insisted. But no way was I trying that. I'd probably land on my head and break my neck. I think I'll stick with front flips. I hopped up on the trampoline and showed her my best front flip. I managed to successfully land on my feet. We spent the next 2 hours jumping and laughing. At one point, Savannah's cat, Mr. Meow, came outside, and we put him on the trampoline with us and tried to get him to jump. He did not like that. I couldn't even make out his orange stripes as he tore around the side of the house. Savannah and I plopped down on our backs, too wiped out to jump anymore. I think my legs have turned to jello, she complained. Yeah, working out will do that to you, I teased. Hey, I work out. I guess if you count carrying around those 2-ton weights with you everywhere you go. Oh, shut up, she swatted at me lightly. My boobs aren't that big. If you say so. She rolled on her side and rested her head in her hand. Her expression turned serious when she looked at me. I've been thinking. Uh-oh. She swatted me again. I'm trying to be serious here. I sighed and shifted to face her before resting my own head in my hand. I'm sorry, okay, what have you been thinking about? Just about the whole Darla thing. It's all so surreal. I have another theory. What are you thinking? I asked slowly. She swallowed, like telling me it was too hard for her. Please don't be mad at me. Why would I be mad at you? Just tell me you won't be mad. Okay, I won't be mad. She lowered her voice even though no one else was around. When she spoke, I swear to God the earth stopped. What if it was Collin? I could have been holding my breath for a mere second, or it could have been eons. I had no way of knowing because in that moment, it felt like time itself was standing still. After a long pause that I couldn't quite measure, I finally began breathing again and managed to speak. My voice felt hoarse and scratchy in my throat. What would make you say that? He's so insistent that his dad didn't do it. What if that's because he knows who really did? I must have felt the same way Collin had when I told him I suspected his father. Pain and anger coursed through my veins, almost like Savannah had accused me of such evil. Collin was sweet. We'd connected. We could talk in a way that I hadn't been able to with anyone but Savannah. The guy wasn't capable of murder. That's crazy, I told her. She raised her brows. Is it? Because that theory you came up with about his dad, he could have easily had the same motive. I didn't see him at the dance or after party, so what if that means he doesn't have an alibi? Oh my God. No, Collin wouldn't be that mad at his sister. Savannah, he wants to find her. Would a murderer want to find his sister? She shrugged. Maybe that's not his real motive. Maybe he's trying to make sure we don't find anything. You know, keep your friends close but your enemies closer. My stomach suddenly felt empty. You don't think Collin is actually capable of something like that, do you? I don't know what he's capable of. I know he's big enough to overpower Darla, though. Come on, Savannah. Listen to yourself. That's crazy. Is it, though? Do you even really know Collin? I mean, think about it. You run up to the bluff every day after work, and just this week you two start running into each other? Right after Darla goes missing? And the rumor says she was murdered on that very same bluff. Maybe he's there making sure no one is snooping around. It felt like my insides were turning to mush. It couldn't be Collin. Except the more Savannah talked, the more it became believable. What would be his motive? I asked. Savannah shrugged. Darla was leaving. She was breaking up their family. His mom did the same thing, didn't she? It was like a repeat of his mom's abandonment. I'm not saying that he intended to do it, but what if it made him angry? Enough anger can change a person. Make them do things they'd regret. Stop, I insisted. Just stop. I pushed to a seated position and slid across the trampoline to the edge. I'm going to need a minute to think. We were only starting to become friends, but I'd known him for years. I didn't think Collin could do something like this. I didn't think anyone could hurt Darla, but they had. If what you're saying is true, that Collin... I couldn't bear to finish that sentence. What do we do tomorrow? He asked us to meet him at the bluff. Savannah pressed her lips together. "We can't not go. Then he'll know we're on to him. As long as we play dumb, he won't suspect that we suspect anything." Savannah was right. If Collin was the killer, then playing along was our safest option. We were going to have to meet up with him at the bluff tomorrow morning and pretend everything was normal. I just hoped she was wrong about him. Chapter 11. The thought of meeting up with a murderer churned my insides, and I didn't feel like I could eat breakfast. "Isn't it dangerous to go?" I asked Savannah in the morning, still only half believing her theory. I'd taken the day off work for the play, which opened this afternoon. "It's dangerous not to go," she told me as she smeared a dark line of makeup across her eye. She turned to me from the mirror. "If we don't go, he'll realize that we know. That could put us in more danger." "You really think it could be him?" She twisted her mouth to the side. "I don't know what to believe. Are you sure those girls you heard in the bathroom were serious?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. I have no doubt that Darla Baxter was murdered on that bluff. "How would the girls even know?" She drew in a breath and paused her makeup routine. "Do you think they had something to do with it?" "I don't think so." Savannah resumed drawing lines on her face. "Why hasn't it gotten around school yet? No one else is talking about it." "Maybe because the girls don't blab about everything they hear to everyone they know." My tone came out snarkier than I intended. She rolled her eyes. "It could make it around school in a heartbeat if we put it in the hands of the right people." "Well, let's make sure that doesn't happen. People will start making assumptions. People could get hurt." Savannah shifted to stare at me. "People already got hurt. Darla. Isn't it worth exposing the killer so he doesn't strike again?" "You still think it was Collin," I accused. She pressed her lips together. "I think it makes as much sense as the other two theories you had." "Well, like you said, we have to go meet up with him, though I'm not sure we'll find anything," I said. "Maybe not, but we have to try. It rained on Sunday, which means it will be harder to spot the scene of the crime." That's why I didn't see any blood afterward, I realized. The rain had washed it away. "But at least we might be able to get some more answers from Collin," she pointed out. She stood up to leave the room. "Savannah." I grabbed her by the arm before she could make it too far. "Be nice to Collin, okay? I don't think he did it." 20 minutes later, we met up with Collin in the parking lot at the top of the bluff. We'd all walked because none of us had cars of our own. 2 cars were parked there, and we watched a group of 4 guys from our school pile out of one of them before they headed down on the path toward the clearing. Collin waited until they were out of earshot before speaking. "Thank you both for coming." The knot in my chest eased when I saw him, because I didn't believe for a second Savannah's theory was true. He was too sweet, and I felt comfortable in his presence. "We want to help," I offered. I exchanged a glance with Savannah, but she kept her features stoic. The only indication I received that she was nervous was the way she twisted the necklace Sean had given her around her fingers. Her mom had fixed the clasp last night, and she'd been wearing it ever since. "I figured we could all split up," Collin said. "Keep an eye out for anything out of the ordinary. Upturned leaves, blood, broken twigs, a body, anything." A shiver traveled down my spine when he mentioned a body. "I was thinking I could take this side of the bluff. Someone could take the other side of the road, and then someone could take up here over by the cliff." Collin pulled out his phone. "Let's trade numbers so we can call if we find anything." I took my phone out of my pocket. When I glanced over at Savannah, I noticed her hands were shaking. I lightly elbowed her in the ribs to tell her to take it easy. "We'll meet back here in an hour if no one finds anything. Sound good?" Collin asked once we had each other's numbers programmed in our phones. "Yep," I answered, while Savannah remained silent, staring at Collin with wide eyes. He turned from us and made his way to his section of the bluff. I was just about to start toward the other side of the steep slope when Savannah grabbed my arm. "Are you crazy?" she hissed. "We're not splitting up. He could come after one of us. Maybe that was his plan all along." I jerked my arm from her grasp. "You can't still believe it was him." She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes told me she wasn't sure. I was going to have to prove her wrong. "Fine," I told her. "We'll stick together." Collin had already disappeared into the trees. "Where do you suggest we start?" Savannah asked. I didn't even have to think about it. There. I pointed to the bush of death. I knew it was silly to return there. I had already been there multiple times, investigating, and hadn't found a smidgen of evidence. But starting at the bush of death was my best option right now. It didn't surprise me that nothing showed up when Savannah and I began scouting the area. We spent a good 10 minutes combing the grass around the parking lot before venturing into the trees that separated the parking lot from the clearing. Eventually, we made our way to the clearing, but with no luck finding any clues.
"What is it we're supposed to be looking for again?" Savannah asked.
"Clues," I answered simply. "Want to try the side of the bluff by the path?" I pointed. It was the path I always came up when running. We can't stay on the trail if we hope to find something.
"Okay,"
she agreed. We treaded lightly through the leaves. While my footsteps were fairly quiet, Savannah's sounded like some massive wild animals. I braced myself against a tree to keep from sliding down the slope. "Savannah," I hissed, "you're kicking up leaves everywhere you go. Be careful. We don't want to mistake your footsteps for a clue."
"Oh, sorry."
She began stepping with the balls of her feet, which helped. After a while, she spoke up again.
"I have no idea what I'm supposed to be looking for. I'm not a tracker."
"I know." I tiptoed forward. "Just keep an eye out for anything that may seem unusual."
"Did you hear Collin before?"
she asked, stepping lightly around a tree.
"He was like, 'We're looking for a body.' You don't think she could still be out here, do you?"
I held my breath, still pushing forward. "Well, you think he's the one who did it. Would he really suggest that to us if he did it?" She narrowed her eyes in thought.
"No, I guess not."
We both went silent again for a long time while we searched, but we didn't find anything. We began climbing the bluff again and checked out a few more areas of trees we hadn't looked through. A scream cut through the air, stopping me in my tracks. The cry took me back to that night, and horror permeated my bones. I immediately began sprinting toward the clearing. Not again, I thought. Savannah followed behind me.
"Kai!"
When I broke through the trees, I noticed 3 of the 4 guys from school we'd seen in the parking lot. They stood on the opposite side of the wooden barrier, just inches from the edge of the cliff, looking over. "Hey!" I called, running over to them. I stopped at the barrier to catch my breath. "Is someone hurt?" They laughed in unison. "Are we hurt?" one of them mocked. He backed up and removed his shirt, then turned back toward the water. Before I could process what was going on, he sprinted forward before the ground ended and his bare feet were thrashing in the air. My features must have gone pale, because the other 2 guys looked at me and laughed. I craned my neck to get a better view of the guy who'd jumped, but I couldn't see him. I heard a splash hit the water, then came the sound of thrilling laughter. My heart rate slowed. They were only cliff jumping. No one was in danger. I sank to the ground like I was going to be sick. When I'd heard their screams, I thought the killer might be back. I hadn't even noticed Savannah was next to me until I saw her shadow. She knelt beside me.
"Hey, what's going on?"
I slowed my breathing. I thought...
"They'll be fine. These guys do this all the time," she assured me. "Come on, let's get back to the parking lot."
By the time I found my breath, the last 2 guys had jumped. I could hear their laughter echoing off the cliffside. We were a few minutes away from the hour mark, so we returned to the parking lot where we agreed to meet up with Collin. "I'm sorry I freaked," I told Savannah. "I thought someone was hurt." She frowned.
"Not today, at least."
Savannah took a seat in the grass next to the bush of death. As much as I didn't want to sit right there, I found a spot beside her. She lowered herself onto her back like she was exhausted.
"Are you sure you heard the girls say it happened on the bluff?"
"I'm sure," I said.
"It doesn't look like there's anything to find. Maybe we should head home before he comes back."
Savannah swiveled her head to the side to take in her surroundings. "He's not dangerous," I practically whispered.
"Well, maybe."
Savannah's words instantly came to a halt, and she rolled over on her belly. Her eyes locked on something near the patch of trees. I followed her gaze but didn't see anything.
"Oh my God, what is that?"
She shuffled to her feet and hurried over to whatever it was she saw. "What's what?" I followed behind her.
"That,"
she answered, crouching down next to the edge of the tree line. She pulled the underbrush and a few leaves away from a spot on the ground and grabbed onto something. I couldn't see it because her body blocked my view. What? What is it? My mind raced through the possibilities. Could it be the rock I'd been looking for? Maybe it was one of Darla's shoes. Whatever it was had been concealed by falling leaves over the past week. Savannah turned toward me with wide eyes. When I looked into her palm, my heart nearly stopped. Could it be Darla's? You don't think, I started, but I trailed off before I could finish the sentence.
That it's Darla's?
She finished for me.
It could be.
The phone in Savannah's hand certainly looked like something Darla would carry around. It was the latest model with a slim pink case. Darla must have lost it in the struggle. Well, turn it on, I nearly shouted.
I'm trying,
she insisted while holding down the power button. You think the rain fried it? I wondered. She shrugged.
I think it just ran out of power. And look, too, the screen is broken.
Did you two find anything? Collin's voice called from behind us. I whirled around at the same time Savannah shoved the phone behind her back.
No,
she lied. What do you have there, then? He finally closed in on us and stopped.
Oh, this?
Savannah held up the phone.
It's my...
Oh my God! Collin snatched the device from Savannah's hands. Where did you find this? This is my sister's phone. Are you sure? I asked, inching toward him. He didn't take his eyes off the phone. I'm sure. This is the phone case I bought her for her birthday. Collin's eyes looked empty as he absorbed our find as reality. He had to sit down to take it all in. It was like, to him, this was confirmation of her death. Like he didn't quite believe it until now. Collin's shoulders shook while he stared at the phone in his hands, and then he couldn't hold it back any longer. A tear fell from his eye and landed on the screen before he folded his face into his legs and sobbed. I shot Savannah a glare and hissed lowly, "See, he isn't the killer." Her expression softened like she agreed with me. There. I didn't say anything when I sat in the grass next to Collin and rested a hand on his shoulder. I couldn't tell if he was okay with it or if it bothered him because he didn't react. He sobbed into his knees, and all I wanted was to tell him I understood. But I didn't. Not really. My heart broke for him. Savannah found her way to the opposite side of him and wrapped an arm around him. I knew it was more than just a comforting hug. It was an apology for accusing him of murder, even though he didn't know she'd done that. After a long silence where no one spoke, Collin finally pulled in a deep breath and rubbed his tears away. I'm sorry. You have nothing to apologize for, I assured him. He let out a puff of air. Guys aren't supposed to cry like this. That's sexist, I said, rubbing his shoulder. You have every right to cry. He sucked in another long breath, but his voice trembled. I know Darla was only 1.5 years older than me, but I always looked up to her. We fought like siblings, but she was there for me when no one else was. After our mom left, Dad would get in these moods. Darla always tried to make things better. She'd build blanket forts and make nachos so we could hide away and watch movies. She used to take me down to the bridge that crosses the river, and we'd toss rocks and leaves in the water to watch the ripples. I leaned closer to him, running my hand over his back. In any other situation, this might seem awkward, but in that moment, it felt completely natural to comfort him. I can't believe she's gone, Collin sniffled.
We should go to the police,
Savannah suggested. Is this enough evidence? I asked, gesturing to the phone. I tried to talk to Jack, and he didn't believe me. Collin curled the phone in his hands. Then we'll have to see what's on this phone ourselves, and if there's evidence here, we'll turn it over to the police. Collin had this look in his eyes like he had to know. I knew the second we turned the phone into the police, they'd file it away in evidence, and we'd never know for sure what was on it. Collin deserved answers. She's your sister, I said. It's up to you. Collin stood, a look of stone-cold resolve on his face. I want to know. Savannah and I got to our feet beside him. We need to find a charger to see what's on the phone, I said. My house is the closest, and I should have a charger that fits at home. Let's get going, Collin said eagerly. He started walking away, but Savannah grabbed my wrist before we could follow him. She dropped her gaze.
I'm sorry I said those things about Collin. He's obviously not the killer.
I've been trying to tell you that all along, I said.
Collin's safe,
Savannah agreed.
Now let's go see what's on that phone.
Chapter 12. I was hoping Jack would be at my house today, so if we found anything, we could show him right away. But nobody was home. Mom had left a note on the fridge saying she was picking up an extra shift at the salon, and that Braden was at his friend Zach's house.
Sean wanted to take me out to eat before the play, Savannah reminded me. I might have to call and cancel.
I grabbed a charger from my room, and the three of us huddled together on the couch. I held my breath in anticipation as Collin connected the charger. He held down the power button and the screen lit up. I noticed the device shake slightly in his hands. "You okay?" I asked. I don't know what we'll find. I still don't want to believe the rumors are true." He rubbed a hand over his face before the home screen loaded. Collin swiped the screen only to be prompted for a PIN. I sucked in a deep breath. "Do you know the passcode?" He shook his head. "I might be able to guess it, though." His fingers grazed over the broken screen, but the first try was no good, nor the second. He paused for a moment to think before typing in a series of numbers. To my relief, the screen unlocked. "What was the password?" I asked. "It was the date she and Sean started dating," Collin said. "I remembered because it was 2 days before my birthday."
That's weird she still uses it as a passcode,
Savannah pointed out, sounding a bit bitter. She was right, though. If Darla had a new boyfriend, wouldn't she be over Sean? "She must have not bothered to change it recently," I offered. My fingers quivered against my thighs in anticipation. Collin began scrolling through different apps, and I barely noticed when I leaned in closer to him to get a better look. He navigated to the messages folder to check Darla's texts. As soon as her messages opened, my heart nearly stopped. Right there at the top was the last conversation Darla had before her death, dated less than an hour before I'd witnessed her last breaths. But it wasn't the timing of the messages that left my throat dry. The owner of the number texting Darla was listed as traitor in her phone. We all went silent for a beat. I looked to Collin. "What does that mean?" He shook his head, never taking his eyes off the screen. "I have no idea."
"Click on the conversation," Savannah exclaimed. "See what it says."
Collin gave a shudder as he opened the thread. He scrolled to the top of the conversation to view where it all started. Either Darla hadn't texted this number before, or she'd deleted previous conversations because this one was short. It started the night of her death. "Hey, we need to talk," the traitor's message said. "No, we don't," Darla had texted back. "I have nothing to say to you. I'm over it. Have been for a long time. I have something to say to you." "Really? Because you had your chance." "I know, and I'm sorry. Can we talk? In person? Right now?" "Yes, this can't wait." Darla didn't text back before Traitor returned another text. "Please." "You can't be serious," Darla's text said. "You betrayed me." "I know I did, but you need to hear the whole story." Darla's next text sent 2 minutes later. "It's late. Do we need to do this now?" "Yes. Can we meet somewhere?" Darla's following text was timestamped 6 minutes later, like she had been contemplating whether or not to meet up with this person. "Fine. Where? The Bluff?" That's where the texts ended. As soon as we were all done reading through the conversation, we exchanged glances. I forced down the lump in my throat and noticed Savannah do the same. A muscle popped in Collin's jaw, but he relaxed before he spoke. "Do you know what this means?" Collin's eyes glazed over, but remained locked on the screen.
"Yeah,"
Savannah's voice quivered.
"It means that whoever owns this number is the murderer."
I didn't speak for a long time, only let this newfound information sink in. The first thing I noticed was that it didn't make sense that Darla's boyfriend was the killer. Certainly this wasn't her boyfriend. If she had run away with him, she wouldn't be calling him traitor in her phone. The conversation didn't do anything to hint that she was running away either. Collin headed back to the main message screen as these thoughts swam in my mind. He began scrolling through the messages, but all the names were recognizable. There was nothing to name her mystery boyfriend. I wondered how he fit into the picture. No one had heard of him. He didn't appear on any of Darla's social channels. She hadn't even texted him. Another few moments passed before I realized why. A sharp intake of breath passed my lips, but I was in too much shock to truly notice I'd made a noise. Collin and Savannah stared at me expectantly. I finally managed to squeak out words. I just realized something." I stood from the couch and paced around the living room to calm myself, although I'm not sure how much it helped. The whole thing with Darla's boyfriend, it just doesn't make sense. There's no mention of him in her phone anywhere. If she was going to run away with this guy, she must have loved him, right? Except if that were true, she would have connected with him somehow. Collin, check her calls. Are there any incoming or outgoing calls to strange names or numbers? Collin quickly closed the messaging app and opened the phone function to scroll through it. His face fell. No, it doesn't look like she made many calls. I stopped pacing. You see what I mean? She would have called him and talked to him for hours on end if she was close enough to him to want to run away. Don't you think? Collin dropped his hand to his lap, and his features paled as he realized the same thing I had. There is no mystery boyfriend. The room went dead silent for what felt like a full minute. When Savannah broke the silence, she spoke slowly.
Where did the rumor of the mystery boyfriend come from?
Collin ran his fingers through his hair and shifted uncomfortably. She mentioned him in the note she left. I finally fell back down on the couch beside Collin. My leg heated in the spot that grazed against the side of his knee. I don't get it. Why would she say she was running away with some guy when she was going to meet up with this other person? Savannah turned toward Collin.
What exactly did the note say?
One hand came up to rub his face, as if he was trying to rid the tension from his expression. He began to recite the note like he'd read it 1,000,000 times. I'm sorry to do this to you again, but I love him and I can't live without him anymore. You don't know him, but we're happy together. Don't worry about me. I love you both. Darla. After a brief silence, Collin spoke in a broken tone. I think my dad was trying to give her space like she asked. She said not to worry, but I just haven't been able to stop. Savannah pressed her lips together, like things weren't adding up.
The note you just described and these texts don't match up. Do you think maybe she knew something was going to happen to her and was trying to save you and your dad the pain?
Collin shook his head. If she thought she was in any real danger, she wouldn't have left the house. I'm not sure we're asking the right question, though. I mean, I'm as interested as either of you to know what that letter meant and why Darla, I don't know, lied? But these texts prove that she met someone at the bluff, where the rumors say she was murdered. If she met up with them, that'd make this person the murderer. So the question is, who is this mystery traitor? Savannah and I exchanged a glance, but neither of us had an answer to give. The area code, Collin continued. It's from around here, but I don't recognize the number. Do you think we can look it up? Savannah immediately had her phone out and began typing the number into a search bar. I eyed Darla's screen, where Collin had pulled up the texting conversation again. I didn't recognize the number either. Savannah bit her lip while she scrolled through the search results.
All I'm seeing is what carrier the number is on. I'm not sure we'll get an owner's name. I'll keep looking.
Do you have any theories? I asked Collin while Savannah fixated her attention on the phone. It could be anyone, honestly. His eyes met mine. Like I told you, she lost a lot of friends last year. Not all of them, but it could have been any of the ones who didn't stick around. Or it could have been someone else entirely. Who could have done something so horrible to her that she would call them a traitor? A thought flickered through my mind, but I quickly shoved it away. Only, it resurfaced almost as quickly. It couldn't be her mother, could it? Her mom had abandoned her family, and that was enough to earn her traitor status. But what kind of a mother would kill her own child? And why would her mom come back after so many years and ask to talk in private instead of meeting her at home? Collin would recognize her number, though, so that didn't make sense. Who else would be a traitor in Darla's eyes?
We should call the number,
Savannah suggested. And say what? I asked. She shrugged.
It doesn't matter what we say. We just have to get a name. Say you're from a local radio station. Say the number got entered into a drawing for concert tickets and you need their name to confirm their entry.
What about caller ID? I asked.
They won't know the difference, she promised.
You do it, I insisted. You're the actress. She sighed, but reluctantly agreed. Collin showed her the number on Darla's phone, and she began dialing. I held my breath. Savannah stood and began pacing around the room. All I could hear was the ringing phone on the other end of the line. When I heard a woman's voice, I began breathing again, but my breaths were shallow. Savannah didn't say anything before she hung up the phone. What happened? Collin asked.
They didn't pick up, she answered. It went to voicemail, and it was just an automated message that repeated the number back to me. Maybe I entered the wrong number?
She leaned over the arm of the couch to check the number on Darla's screen again. Her boobs were practically in Collin's face, and her necklace swayed back and forth like a pendulum. Collin averted his gaze respectfully, but then did a double take. He drew in a sharp breath as his eyes locked on the charm around her neck. Where did you get that? Savannah smiled proudly, like she was glad he noticed her latest treasure.
My boyfriend gave it to me. Isn't it pretty?
I heard him swallow hard, and then the world stopped when he spoke. I know who murdered my sister. Chapter 13.
What?
Savannah demanded. She took a couple steps back and pulled her necklace protectively to her chest. Collin clenched his jaw. That's my sister's necklace. Savannah shook her head.
No, it's mine.
You are dating Sean Cameron, aren't you? He pressed. Savannah cocked a challenging eyebrow.
And?
That's the same necklace he gave my sister when they were dating, Collin insisted. I'm certain of it. She wore it all the time. I was too stunned to speak. Could Sean be the traitor Darla had listed in her phone? I rested a hand on his shoulder. Are you sure? I mean, maybe he just likes the necklace and bought 2 of them. No, Collin said. It's my sister's. I'll show you. Collin pulled up photos on Darla's phone and scrolled through them. A few moments later, he turned the screen to us. There on the screen was a photo of Darla dressed for the homecoming dance. The necklace Savannah was currently wearing sparkled off Darla's chest. My breath stopped. We found him. We found the killer. That's why Savannah needed a new necklace clasp, because it wasn't new. Savannah crossed her arms and spoke in a bitter tone.
That doesn't make sense. The number that texted her wasn't Sean's.
He could have a secret number, Collin pointed out. Savannah wasn't buying it.
Sean was with me that night.
Something clicked, and I realized something. Didn't you say he left the party earlier than you? Savannah glanced down at her hands.
I guess so.
He didn't say where he was going? Collin asked.
We weren't really together then, she admitted. He didn't exactly confide in me.
Uh-oh. This was starting to make too much sense. Sean didn't have an alibi. I could see it in Savannah's eyes that she was starting to wonder if our suspicions were true.
He didn't do it,
she persisted.
I would know. He's my boyfriend.
You've only been dating him a week, Collin pointed out.
What does that matter?
Savannah practically yelled. She shot me a pleading expression, a look that said she had changed her mind about Collin, so I owed it to her to change my mind about Sean. But I couldn't. Until we knew more, it wasn't looking good for him. How well do you really know him? Collin asked gently. Savannah just stood there for several seconds before scoffing.
You two can entertain the idea, but I'm not going to listen to it. You're wrong, and I'll prove it.
She began marching toward the front door, and I quickly followed and grabbed her wrist to stop her. Wait, Savannah. I couldn't stand by and let Savannah continue hanging out with him when she could be his next victim. But I knew she wasn't going to take no for an answer. If you really want to do this, then let us come with you, I offered. If we do this right, we can get Sean to tell us what he knows. If Sean confesses, then we have everything we need to convince the police. Either way, you'll know. Savannah hesitated.
He's not going to talk in front of you two.
We'll hide nearby and record everything he says, Collin suggested. Savannah was stubborn, and I thought I was sure of what she'd say, so I was surprised when something else entirely came out.
Okay, we can try it.
The plan was simple. Savannah was scheduled to meet up with Sean at Amberg Hamburger before she had to get ready for hair and makeup for the show. She'd convinced him to sit at one of the tables outside, since people almost never sat there and it was private. Collin and I would hide behind the raised flower bed and record while Savannah got the truth out of him. We walked to Amberg Hamburger, and I rested a hand on Savannah's shoulder. You're an amazing actress. I've seen you improv like nobody's business, and your poker face? Flawless. You can do this. She nodded confidently.
You're right. I just hope you're wrong about him.
Collin and I crept behind the raised flower bed and waited. My mouth went dry, and my hands began shaking. I knew Sean wouldn't do anything to my best friend in public, but having her out of my sight frightened me. Collin grabbed my hand and squeezed it. It's going to be okay, he told me in such a soothing voice that I couldn't help but believe him. Collin lowered the volume on his phone to silent and then opened the camera app. I didn't know what Savannah said to get Sean to eat outside when there was still plenty of seating indoors. But they emerged from the building a few minutes later and found their way to the table nearest us. There wasn't anyone else around. When Collin and I secretly snuck a peek through the thick mums, I noticed that Savannah sat facing us. Sean sat across from her with his back to us. Collin began recording.
Sean,
Savannah started. Her voice was plenty loud enough for us to hear clearly and pick up on the camera. Yeah? He asked in a melodic voice. No wonder he was a lady killer, I thought, before immediately cringing at my choice of words. Even his voice made girls' ovaries perk up. Well, except for mine, because I knew what he had done. Sean bit into a fry while Savannah spoke.
I was wondering if I could ask you something.
I didn't know what she was going to say to get his confession, and I watched on with interest. Anything, baby, Sean said before shoving another ketchup-covered fry in his face.
We've been dating for a whole week now, and, well...
She tucked a strand of brown hair behind her ear and pulled her bottom lip into her mouth seductively.
I've never been with anyone.
Even from the back, I could see that Sean had stopped chewing mid-bite. I could only imagine what kind of expression was fixed on his face at the moment. You're kidding, he said in disbelief. Savannah batted her eyes at him in a way that he wouldn't have noticed unless he knew her as well as I did.
I'm serious. I thought that maybe you'd like to be my first.
I swear I saw the breath leave Sean's chest. I wasn't sure where Savannah was going with this. Sean reached across the table to rest his hand on Savannah's. You sure, baby? The other day you said you weren't ready.
I changed my mind. I'm ready now.
Sean ran his fingers through his hair. That's... wow. You know I really like you, right?
I like you too, Sean, she admitted.
So, like when? Now? His voice was full of too much hope, which made me want to hurl.
If you think there's enough time.
Oh, baby, don't worry. There's enough time. Sick, I thought. Collin and I exchanged a look of disgust before fixing our eyes back on the scene. Savannah rolled her necklace around in her fingers.
The thing is, I want to know that I can trust you completely. I always told myself that whoever I lost it to, I'd trust with all my heart, that I'd love them.
You can trust me, baby. I promise. Savannah nodded, and a somber expression crossed her face. If I didn't know she was acting, I would have fallen for this whole conversation, too.
Then will you answer a question for me?
Sean nodded almost too eagerly. Of course. What is it, baby? Savannah paused for dramatic effect.
Where'd you buy me this necklace?
Sean shifted uncomfortably while my own fingers grasped on tighter to the corner of the flower bed. Why do you ask? She paused.
Never mind. It's silly, really.
Knowing Savannah the way I did, I could tell these words were calculated for effect. Come on, you can tell me. Why are you so interested?
I just had this silly idea. Like I said, it's really stupid.
She averted her gaze from his. Savannah, Sean said firmly, like he was concerned for her. What's wrong? Savannah sighed, like she couldn't keep it in any longer.
I saw a picture of Darla, and she was wearing this same necklace. Did you buy this necklace for me or for your ex-girlfriend?
Sean appeared at a loss of words. Oh, what I would give to see the look on his face at this moment. The tension growing in the air sent a nervous shudder through my body. I inched closer to Collin to get a better look through the flowers until the edge of my leg just barely touched his.
Please be honest with me, Sean,
Savannah said sweetly.
I just want to know I can trust you.
A long silence stretched between them, like Sean was calculating the costs and benefits. Finally, he spoke. Okay, Savannah, I'll tell you the truth. I admit I bought the necklace for Darla, but you have to understand that it was really expensive. It's not just some cheap knockoff from the clearance rack. The truth is, I got the necklace back from her because really, it was mine, and I wanted you to have it. You're my girl now. Savannah broke down. The facade she'd just put on crumbled around her. Her hand slapped to her mouth, and her shoulders began shaking uncontrollably. Savannah, what's wrong? Sean asked in a tone that said he actually cared. One you wouldn't think would come out of a heartless murderer. It's true, Savannah cried, staring into Sean's face in horror. We can get another one that's just yours. Sean reached across the table for Savannah's hand, but she immediately recoiled.
I don't care about the necklace.
She sprang to her feet. Then what's going on? Sean's voice rose.
You don't get it, do you? This isn't about the necklace, Sean.
She slowly took a step back without distancing herself too far. Luckily, Sean didn't advance.
I saw a picture of Darla the night of the homecoming dance, and she was wearing this necklace.
Tears began streaming down her face.
That was the night Darla disappeared. You left the party early.
Oh my God, Sean said slowly, rising from his chair ever so slightly. You think... Savannah interrupted before he had a chance to speak.
Darla didn't run away, did she, Sean?
Savannah, he said firmly, extending a hand out to her like he was trying to reason with a rabid dog. Calm down, please. I'll explain everything.
How you...
Her voice caught in her throat. She lowered her voice to a whisper.
How you killed your ex-girlfriend?
Please, Savannah, he begged. I swear to you I didn't kill her. Something in his voice seemed to reassure Savannah, because a moment later, she was slowly easing into the seat across from him. By now, my heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest, and Collin nervously shivered from beside me. I reached for Collin's bicep and leaned into him. Savannah spoke in such a quiet voice that I wasn't sure the camera could even pick it up. Yet her tone seemed so even and controlled, like she owned the situation. Her palms lay firmly on the table in front of her, and a dark look crossed her eyes.
Sean, do you know what happened to Darla?
After a long pause, he spoke with a wavering tone. Yes. A pained expression crossed Savannah's face when she gulped, making it look like she was swallowing needles.
Is she dead?
He paused for a second time, and when he answered, his voice cracked like he was holding back tears. Yes. Savannah's eyes shifted, but she maintained a controlled tone that she seemed to pull out of nowhere.
Did you kill her?
No, Sean answered in a near whisper.
Do you know who did?
Sean couldn't answer audibly this time. Instead, he nodded like he was ashamed of the answer.
Who?
Savannah asked warily. In the next few moments, time seemed to stand still. My breath ceased, and Collin froze next to me. Even the sounds of the wind seemed to die off. Then, Sean spoke the name that would change the course of our entire investigation. Tiana King. Chapter 14.
I have to go.
Savannah stood. Savannah, please, Sean cried. She whirled around toward him before I could truly process the name Sean had given us.
No, Sean,
Savannah insisted. He stopped in his tracks when she faced him with a hard look. Collin and I remained paralyzed in place, continuing to watch the scene unfold as we hoped more information would surface. We couldn't break in now, not when the confessions were only beginning to roll.
How do you know all that?
Savannah demanded.
You may not have killed her, but you...
She broke into sobs again.
You left the party early.
I know what I did was wrong, and I feel awful for it, but I can't turn Tiana in. I'm an accessory.
What the hell does that mean?
Savannah's voice rose without either of them moving. Sean ran his fingers through his hair vigorously. Look, Tiana and I are friends. I was the one person she trusted. After it happened, she called me, okay? I hate myself for what I did, but I helped her. I helped her cover it up. That's when I took the necklace.
Why?
Savannah asked in a small voice.
Why would you help her?
It was an accident, Sean insisted. If anyone finds out, it will ruin Tiana's life. Darla was already gone, and there was nothing we could do. I was just helping out a friend, okay? All of this was beginning to make sense now. The mystery number must have been Tiana's. She told me she and Darla weren't friends anymore. She had dated Sean as soon as he and Darla broke up. She definitely fit the traitor category. Please don't tell anyone, Sean begged. It was an accident. My stomach twisted. Smashing someone over the head with a rock was no accident. Sean went to grab Savannah's hand, but she yanked away from him.
I won't tell anyone, but I can't be around you right now.
But I was honest with you, Savannah, he said, like that would make it all better.
Just don't, Sean.
Savannah turned and hurried off into the building. I tensed as she disappeared. Neither Collin nor I moved, or Sean would see us. He returned to his table to grab his trash and then tossed it into the garbage near us, much too close for my liking. Then he headed off in the opposite direction. I breathed a sigh of relief, which felt like my first breath in the last half hour. I lowered myself from the edge of the flower bed and twisted to rest my back against the cold concrete. Collin turned off his recording and knelt next to me. He didn't say a word. "You okay?" I asked. He gave an incredulous sigh, but didn't give a direct answer. "I finally know what happened to my sister. We can finally go to the police." I stole a glance toward the building, and I could see Savannah through the window. "Let's go inside." Collin nodded and grabbed my hand to pull me up from the ground. We found Savannah seated in a corner table. Her eyes were bloodshot from tears. "Hey, Savannah," I said sympathetically as I sat across from her. "I'm sorry."
"No, it's okay," she told me,
but even with her great acting skills, I could tell it wasn't okay. "You were right," I pointed out. "It wasn't Sean." Collin pulled out a chair next to me and sat in it.
"No," Savannah insisted. "You were right. Sean is dangerous, and it was stupid of me not to listen to you. I'm glad we did this. I needed to know the truth."
"We all did," Collin said. "And now so can everyone." Savannah wiped her eyes and held her head up confidently.
"Let's go turn the bitch in."
We left Amberg Hamburger and walked several blocks to the police station. I took a deep breath before reaching for the door. I pulled. It didn't budge. I took a step back and read the hours, only to realize the lobby was already closed for the day. In our tiny town, we only had 5 officers on the police force. They must be out on patrol or something. "What do we do?" Collin asked desperately. "Where are we supposed to find the police when they aren't at the station? We need to bring this evidence to someone." I checked the time. Savannah was late for hair and makeup, and the play was going to start in less than half an hour. "What about Jack?" I asked. "He said he was coming to the play today. He'll be there soon. We'll find him in the crowd before the play starts, and you can give him the video." "Then let's break a leg," Collin said. We began walking back toward the school.
"I guess this means the play is canceled," Savannah said. "I want to be with the cast when they hear. They're my team. I have to be there for them."
"We've got to act like everything's normal," Collin insisted. "We can't have anyone freaking out and risk Tiana running. We need to hand this over and let Jack do his job." "Agreed," I said. We arrived at the school, and Mr. Spears immediately started barking orders at Savannah to get backstage and into costume. We didn't want anyone suspecting what we knew until Jack showed up, so Savannah was forced to hurry backstage and act normal. Collin and I eagerly watched the doors for Jack. Collin's grip tightened around his phone, and I began pacing. People started filling the seats in the auditorium, and I still hadn't spotted Jack. The play's start time was quickly approaching, and I was starting to worry he wasn't going to show. The auditorium was beginning to feel suffocating. The room was almost full when I finally saw Jack enter the auditorium. My heart leapt. Another off-duty officer followed beside him, an older guy I knew as Officer Roberts. I yanked on Collin's hand. There he is. We hurried across the auditorium and skidded to a halt in front of the officers. "Jack," I said breathlessly, "we need to talk." He shot a curious glance between the two of us, then turned to Officer Roberts. "I'll be right back." I released a breath when we made it into the hall and around the corner where no one could hear us. "What's this about?" Jack asked. I spoke quickly. "I know you didn't believe me before, but I have proof. Darla Baxter was murdered." Collin opened his mouth to explain further, but Jack cut him off. "Not this again." Jack rolled his eyes. "Kai, I know things have been rough at home the last few years, but you can't go around making up these stories." "It's not stories," Collin growled. "My sister's missing, and you're seriously going to stand here and refuse to do anything about it?" "I know it's unfortunate and hard to deal with things when a family member leaves, but sometimes there's no bigger explanation than that," Jack said. "We're telling the truth," Collin insisted. He lifted his phone to start playing the video, but Jack blew a breath. "Look, kids," he said, and my stomach clenched. I didn't like that he was calling us kids. "I get that you want attention, but this is neither the time nor the place. If you want to play make-believe, you should be up on that stage with the rest of the cast. I came here to support you tonight, and you decided to play this game instead?" I gaped. I couldn't believe he wouldn't listen to us. The sound of music played over speakers, and Tiana's voice rang out over the system. My guts twisted into knots. "That's it! That's her!" I cried. Yeah, Jack said sarcastically. "If you don't mind, I'm going to go find my seat." "Wait, officer!" Collin cried. But Jack was already through the auditorium doors. I whirled toward Collin, my hands curling into fists. "I hate him." "What is it with that prick?" Collin sneered. I dropped my head. "Remember when I told you I ran away from home a few years ago? Jack's the one who found me, and he's labeled me as an attention seeker ever since. He doesn't trust anything I say." "We have to find a way to convince him," Collin said. "How?" I asked desperately. "We're going to have to wait until the play is over and corner him when he leaves." "If that's what it takes to get him to hear us out, then that's what we have to do," Collin decided. "I'm not taking no for an answer next time. I'm going to play him this video and show him exactly how wrong he is." I couldn't believe Jack had shot us down like that. No, scratch that. I could believe it, because he'd always been a complete jerk. Collin sat in the back of the auditorium and kept an eye on Jack, while I slipped backstage to fill Savannah in on what Jack had done. We'd agreed to act as normal as possible until Tiana was arrested, because we didn't want to cause a panic, but it was really hard knowing what she'd done. I spent the next hour and a half sitting in the girls' dressing room with Lindsay while we waited for set changes. The door remained propped open when no one was changing so that we could hear the lines. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to spot our cues. At various intervals, we escaped onto the stage to change sets. I noticed my breath grow increasingly hotter each time I heard Tiana's voice over the speakers. Toward the end of the second act, I saw Lindsay gritting her teeth. Tiana gets on my nerves. I heard the quick patter of feet down the hall. Lindsay noticed as well, and she quickly snapped her jaw shut. Tiana burst in the dressing room in a rage. She had completed her scene, and her mic was turned off. When she stormed past the door, she kicked the doorstop out of the way, leaving the door to fall shut with a click so that Lindsay and I were the only ones to witness the scene. We both stood in surprise.
"What the fuck, Lindsay?"
Tiana spat. She held her peasant skirt up by both hands. Lindsay was too timid to reply, but I could see the fear in her eyes when I glanced at her. "What's wrong, Tiana?" I asked in the kindest voice I could manage.
"She didn't fix my costume like I told her to," Tiana snarled, pointing a finger at Lindsay. "2 buttons fell off on stage, and my skirt almost fell off. I had to improvise and hold it up the entire last scene."
I recognized Tiana's skirt. It was the one I'd helped Lindsay fix. I told Lindsay I didn't know how to sew buttons, and I must not have secured them properly. Tiana was chewing out Lindsay when it was my fault. "Tiana, it was me," I started, but she cut me off.
"Stay out of this. It's not about you. It's about the incompetent girl who thinks she has skills but is really just useless. You don't act, Lindsay, because you can't. So you sit in the background sewing costumes, only, oops, you can't do that either."
Tiana had been nice to me in the past, but it was clear she showed her true colors when she was angry. I stole a glance over at Lindsay and noticed the tears welling up in her eyes. She knew I was the one who sewed on those buttons, yet she was taking the blame. I couldn't let her do that. It wasn't her.
"I told you to stay out of it,"
Tiana snapped. "Thankfully, I only have to wear this costume for one more scene." She crossed the room to the counter, where most girls had left their makeup bags. I know someone must have a safety pin or two. "Hey," I snapped, "you can't go through people's stuff."
"Well, I can't exactly go on stage with a broken costume, can I?"
she countered. She found a safety pin and held it up. "Help," she demanded, staring me in the eyes. I had no choice but to comply.
"Don't forget about the last costume change,"
she told me in a not-so-friendly manner before heading back out of the room. The door fell shut, leaving Lindsay and me alone. For the first time since Tiana had stormed in here, Lindsay made a sound. A sob broke from her chest. I immediately rushed to her side to console her as she lowered herself back into her chair. She didn't mean it. I'm the one to blame. Except the problem was that it sounded like Tiana believed every word she'd said about Lindsay. It made my blood boil. I was ready to give that bitch what she deserved, whether Jack believed me or not. Lindsay raised her head. "She's right. I'm a terrible actress. That's why I don't act. And the costumes? Who am I kidding?" I ground my teeth together. Lindsay was my friend, and she didn't deserve to feel this way. "That's not true, Lindsay. You're great at costumes." A single tear fell down Lindsay's cheek, and that's when I snapped. Tiana wasn't leaving the school tonight unless it was in handcuffs.
If Jack didn't want to listen to me, I'd make him.
Don't worry, I told Lindsay. Tiana's going to get what's coming to her. Chapter 15. I clenched my fists as I left the dressing room and stomped toward the sound booth, where Tyler was running the lights and mics. Tiana's attack on Lindsay had ignited the anger I'd been holding back. She deserved whatever she got. I kept my voice low when I met Tyler because the play was still going on. "Hey," I greeted in a whisper. Tyler pushed his long black hair out of his eyes. "What's up?" After curtain call, turn Tiana's mic back on. He furrowed his brow. "Everyone will be leaving by then." "I know. Trust me. You're going to want to leave her mic on." Tyler's gaze darted to Tiana on stage, and then his lips curled up mischievously. He had no idea what was going on, but I could tell he knew I was cooking up a dirty little plan. Clearly, he wasn't a fan of her either. "I suppose you're not going to tell me," he accused. "No, but trust me, it's going to be good." "Okay," he agreed. I hurried back to the dressing room, where I was needed in only a few minutes. I pulled Tiana's Cinderella ball gown off the hanger and unzipped it, getting ready for her after curtain call. Lindsay noticed. "I'm going to go wait in the hall." I didn't blame her for not wanting to face Tiana again. "That's probably a good idea," I told Lindsay before she left the room. A few minutes later, Tiana entered. We were alone because all the other actors were headed out for the receiving line. We were supposed to do this in under a minute so she could get out there too. "Quick, help me," she demanded. She turned around so I could undo the safety pin on her skirt. I laid the ball gown I was holding across one of the chairs so I could help her. Tiana unclipped her microphone and set it on the counter while I fumbled with the safety pin. "Hurry up," she insisted. My fingers quivered unintentionally. I can do this, I told myself. It wasn't so hard to work up the courage when just the sight of her made me want to punch her in the face. But I couldn't do that, so I'd have to fight with my words. "Tiana, can I ask you something?" I said. "Make it snappy." I tossed the safety pin onto the counter to my right and turned to grab the dress. Tiana had already stripped off her skirt and was working on her top. "How did it feel?" I paused for a second as my throat closed up around my words. I wasn't sure I could do this. My eyes drifted to the microphone resting on the counter, and that sent a bout of confidence through me. Not only could I do this, but I had to do it. We couldn't hear the speakers through the closed door, but I was certain everyone in the auditorium could hear our conversation. "How did what feel?" she asked, gesturing for me to help her into the dress. "Opening night? It was good." I pulled the dress up around her body and began zipping the back, making sure to pull the fabric aside at the trouble spot she'd shown me. "That's not what I meant. I mean, how did it feel to murder your best friend?" I finished the sentence just as I pulled the zipper up all the way. She whirled around, her nostrils flaring. "What the fuck? Who told you that?" "There are rumors," I said confidently. "Why are you so concerned about Darla? Everyone knows she ran away. Now, if you'll excuse me." She began pushing past me, but I stopped her by planting my body between hers and the door. My pulse quickened, and I couldn't believe how brave I was being. Tiana pursed her lips and crossed her arms over her chest. My voice came out stronger than I felt. "So you didn't smash a rock over Darla Baxter's head the night of the homecoming dance?" Tiana's mouth hung open, and her eyes widened. I knew I had her. "Whatever you heard, you're wrong," she insisted. "You mean you weren't up on the bluff that night? You didn't text Darla asking her to meet you there? Your number isn't listed as traitor in her phone?" My shaking hands steadied the more I talked. Tiana took a step back to distance herself from me. The fear in her eyes made it look like she was scared of me. "How do you know all that?" "You're not denying it. Why'd you do it, Tiana?" I asked. "What was it? You had already stolen her boyfriend. You turned half her friends against her. What, you couldn't handle that after all that she still made it on the homecoming court?" "Oh my God, no!" Tiana cried. "It wasn't that at all. It was an accident." Tiana's eyes widened further, though I didn't think that was possible. Her hands flew over her mouth like she'd just realized what she said. She'd just confessed. "Why then?" I demanded. I wanted to know the truth. Tiana retreated slowly until the back of her knees hit a chair. She sank down into it. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I didn't mean to do it. It was an accident, I swear." "Tell me what happened," I insisted. "It was all about homecoming.
she admitted, not meeting my gaze. I asked her to meet me at the bluff so we could talk about what happened last year. I liked Sean, and I wanted him for myself. I'd been trying to get them to break up for months. And when I saw my opportunity at the homecoming after party last year, I took it. Tiana sounded like a horrible friend. I was supposed to find the homecoming queen and blindfold her so she could do the stupid 7 minutes in heaven thing, Tiana confessed. I found Darla first and blindfolded her. I came up from behind so she never knew it was me. And she just went along with it at first because she was so wasted. No one noticed because blindfolded, she looked like the homecoming queen. They were even wearing the same dress. It was such a perfect plot. I hated Tiana more than anything. I put her in the closet knowing that Sean would get mad at her for making out with another guy, Tiana continued. The prank worked and they broke up. Sean and I dated for a while. Tiana paused for a second, but never tore her gaze from a spot on the floor. Obviously, Sean and I weren't meant for each other. When I saw Anna freak out this year, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd done to Darla last year. She never wanted to go into the closet, and she was assaulted because of me. I felt so guilty. I needed to apologize. It couldn't wait. She'd already gone home, so I left the party and asked her to meet me on the bluff. It was where we would always hang out when we were actually friends. She walked from home and met me there, and we got to talking. She took another breath and finally shifted her eyes, but not enough to look at me. We were sitting on the tailgate of my truck. I explained to her how I was the one who blindfolded her and put her in the closet, how I did it on purpose to get Sean. I didn't think we could be friends again, but I thought she'd forgive me because I was being honest. Tiana shook off a shudder. Then she attacked me. She attacked you? I didn't believe it. I told you it was an accident, Tiana insisted. Darla attacked me. The next thing I knew, I was on the gravel and she was on top of me. I remember screaming when I hit the ground. She was yelling at me. Do you have any idea what you've done? I tried to shove her off and tell her I didn't do anything, but she just kept clawing at my dress. I didn't like that Tiana wasn't taking any responsibility for this. Darla was assaulted in that closet. Tiana said it herself. She lost her boyfriend and most of her friends because of Tiana's stupid prank. I finally managed to get her off of me, and I tried running back to the truck, Tiana said. I realized it was useless trying to reconcile with her, and then she pulled my hair, and I was on the ground again. I screamed, and then she kicked me and was on top of me again, pulling my hair. I screamed again. After a struggle, I managed to flip her to the ground and get on top of her, but she was choking me. I couldn't pull away from her. She had me too tight. Tiana's eyes glistened with tears. I wasn't sure if I believed her. She was a good actress and could be making it all up. Except, the 3 screams fit my memory. And if it happened like she said, then when I saw Darla's head hit the ground behind the bush, it must have been when Tiana got on top of her. I thought I was going to die, Tiana continued. I saw a rock next to me and I managed to grab it. I didn't mean to kill her. I was just trying to get her to stop choking me. She didn't let go, so I hit her again. Then, oh my God. Tiana's hands trembled. It was horrible. It was like all the life drained from her eyes. Even if it was an accident, she should have called the cops. What about her body, Tiana? I asked. What happened next? I couldn't let anyone find out what happened, she insisted, like I was supposed to feel sorry for her. I tried to move her, only she was too heavy, so I called Sean. We were still friends, and he was the only one who would understand that it was an accident. He would keep my secret safe and protect me. Sean was as bad as she was. What happened after that? I demanded. Tiana swallowed and spoke quietly. We drove to the cemetery and buried her there with the rock. We gathered some of the leaves and used them to cover the grave so no one would notice it was freshly dug. I forced my shaking hands to steady. That cemetery had been giving me the creeps lately. Maybe there was a reason for that. Tiana sniffled. I snuck into Darla's room and left a note, saying she was running away with her boyfriend. I made him up because I figured that if her family thought she was happy, they wouldn't go looking for her. Finally, it all made sense. There never was a secret boyfriend. Tiana had made the whole thing up. It was easy, Tiana admitted. We'd been best friends forever, so I could copy her handwriting like it was nothing. She'd run away before, so it was perfect cover and no one would suspect anything. Well, they did, I told her bluntly. How did you find out? Tiana begged. It was Sean, wasn't it? He told Savannah, and she told you. You can't tell anyone. You know that, right? Now that you know it was an accident, that Darla attacked me, you can't turn me in. You'll help me, won't you?
Tiana stood and gripped onto my biceps, looking me in the eyes desperately.
If Savannah told you, she has to know it was an accident, too. You know I didn't mean it, right? I can't go to jail for this. I'm not a bad person.
I pulled my arms from her grasp. Tiana disgusted me. She'd murdered someone and felt no remorse. If she cared, she would have called the police. She would have let Darla's family hold a proper funeral. I didn't know what would happen to her now or how long she'd be in prison, but I was certain whatever happened, she deserved it. I took a step back.
No,
Tiana cried. Tears streamed down her cheeks.
You can't tell anyone. I didn't mean it.
I don't have to tell anyone, I said hollowly. They already know. The dressing room door burst open, and Jack stomped into the room. I've heard enough. Tiana King, you're under arrest. Tiana began crying hysterically, while Jack slapped handcuffs over her wrists.
No, please, I swear I'm innocent. It was self-defense.
Jack dragged her toward the door, but he stopped halfway there and turned to me. Sorrow filled his features. I'm sorry I didn't believe you, Kai. Don't worry about it, I said. I watched Jack drag Tiana out of the dressing room while reading her rights to her. There was no apology that could make up for the way he treated me, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was bringing Darla's killer to justice, and we'd done just that. Chapter 16. As soon as Jack was gone, Savannah rushed into the dressing room.
I can't believe you did that.
I sank into one of the chairs, feeling exhausted. Honestly, I can't believe it either. What was it like out there? Everyone must have heard it. I glanced at Tiana's microphone that she'd set on the counter.
Don't worry, Tyler already turned it off after Jack came in.
Savannah pulled a chair up across from me.
It was surreal. Everyone heard you talk over the speakers, and they all sat back down, like they thought it was part of the play. I was outside in the receiving line, but they'd opened the doors so I could hear. When the cast heard what was going on, we crowded around the auditorium doors to listen. When Tiana confessed, the whole place went silent for a second, and then a murmur went across the whole auditorium. Except no one moved. No one tried to stop it. We didn't know what to do.
I swallowed. Then what happened?
When Tiana ratted out Sean, he ran. He jumped over the chairs and sprinted for the exit. Officer Roberts chased him down and tackled him. He put him in cuffs, and Sean started yelling at me across the auditorium. He's like, "You promised."
I could only imagine what that was like to witness.
I saw Jack go down the hall, but he must have been waiting outside the dressing room to see how much Tiana would confess. Then everyone heard him come in, and that's when people started shouting. Some people thought she should rot in jail, and others claimed it was self-defense. That's really all I heard, though. I ran through the auditorium and signaled to Tyler to turn the microphone off. Now here I am telling you all about it.
I rubbed my eyes. She deserved it. Savannah scoffed.
Yeah, she did. And Sean does too. I still can't believe he helped her. And to think I dated him.
It certainly didn't take her long to get over him.
I think I need to stay single for a while, she added. I don't want to get involved with a guy like him ever again. I'll date a theater kid next time, though I'm sure the play is canceled. It's not like we had an understudy.
Wait, I realized. The cast already has its Cinderella. You know all the lines and lyrics. Savannah's eyes lit up, but she quickly protested.
No, I couldn't. After what happened tonight, I'm sure Mr. Spears will cancel.
I don't know, I admitted. You said it yourself. This cast and crew is your team. You need each other now more than ever. None of you should go through this alone. Savannah thought about it for a moment before standing.
You're right, Kai. This is a shock for everyone, and I need to be with them right now.
She started for the door, but I didn't follow. You go, I offered. I need to find Collin. Savannah paused in the doorway, then nodded in understanding.
Message me when you get home.
I will. I gathered my belongings from the dressing room and left through the auditorium. By now, the room was empty, though I could hear Mr. Spears down the hall in the green room. I was surprised to hear someone call my name before I reached the doors. I turned to find Collin closing the distance between us. Kai, I'm glad I caught you. I thought you might have left by now, I said. Collin shook his head. I didn't want to leave without you. I kind of don't want to be alone right now. You don't have to be alone, I promised. I'm here for you. That means a lot. He shoved his hands in his pockets. What do you think will happen next? I'm sure Tiana and Sean will go to jail. The police will probably want to question us, and they'll want that video of Sean's confession. They're probably already at your house talking to your dad. Collin took a moment to absorb all this. I've been thinking about the funeral. I just want to talk to her again, you know? Collin, I'm so sorry, I told him. At least now we have answers, he replied. But I knew it wasn't enough. He didn't want answers. He wanted his sister back. Now Dad and I can put her to rest properly. There was a sadness in his eyes that was almost too much to bear. It was worse than when we found Darla's phone at Eagle Park. Earlier today, there was still hope that Darla might be out there. Now Tiana's confession had confirmed everything. Darla wasn't coming back. I tugged on Collin's arm. Come on, I have an idea. I didn't tell Collin where we were going, but he followed behind me. We left the school, and I led him a few blocks through the streets of Amberg until we reached a bridge that crossed the river. Night blanketed the street, and the light of the street lamps glistened off the water. A pot of hydrangeas grew nearby, and I picked a bundle of flowers and handed them to him. Collin gazed down at the flowers in confusion. What's all this? You don't have to wait for the funeral to talk to her, I said. You told me she used to bring you down here to toss things in the river and watch the ripples. Maybe there's a part of her that's still here. Collin scrunched his brow. You really believe in that kind of stuff? I shrugged. I'd like to, but maybe we don't need to know if it's real or not, as long as we choose to believe it. Collin ran his fingers over one of the petals, and it fell into his palm. He gingerly took a step toward the railing, like he wasn't sure about this. He stayed quiet, and I didn't say anything. He tossed the petal into the water, and the light from the street lamps glittered against the ripples. I'm going to miss you, Darla. There was no one else like you in this world. I'll never forget our blanket forts and movie nights, or the way you burnt eggs every morning because you could never get the temperature right. He gave a light chuckle and threw another petal into the water. I'll never forget the way you teased me about the way I ran. Bigfoot, you called me, because I stomped my feet too hard. You could always hear me coming. I remember the day in middle school when you challenged me to a race, and instead of gloating about your win, you taught me how to run faster. Tears welled in his eyes. He plucked another petal from the flowers and tossed it into the river. You were loving and patient, and you were everything I needed in a big sister. Though your life was short, it mattered more than anything. I hope you find peace wherever you are. I'll see you again one day, Darla. Collin dropped the rest of the petals into the water, and they scattered, creating all kinds of ripples over the surface. A breeze swept down the street, and I liked to think that somewhere out there, Darla was listening. He wiped tears from his eyes and leaned against the railing. I stepped toward him and wrapped a comforting arm around his shoulder. Collin leaned into me, resting his head on mine. Thanks for being here, Kai, he whispered. Then he turned to me and pulled me into a hug, dragging my body close to his. My heart rate slowed as I squeezed him back. Hugging Collin felt natural, like we'd always been meant to live in each other's arms. There was so much peace and comfort there, for both of us. He rocked me from side to side. I wish I could take you home with me. I pulled away to look up at him. My mom would have a fit if I didn't come home tonight, but I'll make you a deal. He cocked an eyebrow. Oh, what's that? I smiled. I'll visit you in your dreams. Chapter 17. I'm home, I announced when I arrived home. I quickly sent Savannah a message to let her know I made it home safe. My mother stood in the kitchen with her phone in her hand, wearing a worried expression. She set it on the table and met my gaze. I was just about to call you. Are you okay? So you heard? I already knew the answer. Jack called. I slumped into a chair at the table. Of course he did. My mother furrowed her brow and situated herself in her own chair in front of a pile of papers. Why do you say it like that? Like you don't like Jack? I had never told my mom how I felt about Jack, and I didn't feel like I could.
But stuff like this only drove a wedge between us. Mom could be gone in a second, just like Darla, and there was so much I'd never said to her. I couldn't continue to hide my feelings from her. I had to clear the air and repair our relationship. I don't like Jack, I admitted. Mom looked shocked, like she'd never picked up on it. I felt bitter, because it showed how little attention she paid. Why not? Jack treats me like a child, like I'm still some 12-year-old kid who makes up stories for attention, I said. He commands all this respect, but he doesn't respect me. I don't know why you want to date him. You don't even have time for Braden and me, and we'll have even less time together if you start dating Jack. Mom burst out laughing. It sounded so strange. I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard my mom laugh like that with me. You think I like Jack? You mean you don't? I asked slowly. Kai, I'm not going to date Jack. I assure you of that. Then why's he been visiting? What's with the haircut and the cooking? My mom leaned back in her chair. It certainly isn't because I want to date him. It's actually something I've been meaning to talk to you about, but I didn't want to tell you until I was sure I had the money. I wanted it to be a surprise. The money for what? My gaze drifted down to the pile of papers on the table. She picked up the envelope that was on top of the stack and slid it across the table. Jack has been helping me for the last couple of months. Most of the time you were at work or on your run when he visited. But it's not because we're dating. He's been helping me with our finances, teaching me how to budget and where to cut costs. The haircut, the cooking. It was all my way of paying him back for his help. Relief washed over me. That was a whole lot better than my mom dating him. So what's this? I reached out for the envelope. Go ahead, Mom smiled. Open it. I did, and when I peeled back the seal, I could hardly believe my eyes. Tears welled in my eyes. All this time I thought my mom didn't care, that she had no regard for me. But here she was, paying me back. I pulled the stack of money out of the envelope without saying a word. That's all the money I borrowed from you. Jack has helped me enough that I've been able to get caught up on some bills and save up money. Mom. I didn't have the words. If you want, we can still do that trim tonight, she offered. How much hair did you want me to cut off? I couldn't speak as a bundle of emotions rose in my throat. I pushed up from my chair and around the table to my mom, where I pulled her into a hug. She drew back for a moment in surprise, and then melted into the embrace. Kai, what is it? Tears streamed down my face. I pulled away from her to wipe them off my cheeks. My voice cracked. I love you is all. Mom squeezed me back. I love you too. What are you guys doing? Braden asked. I looked up to find him standing near the hall. I rushed around the table and threw my arms around him. Braden pushed at me, but I didn't budge. What are you doing? He demanded. I love you, Braden, I told him. Braden relaxed. I love you too, Kai. Mom joined our group hug. It was the first time in a long time our family felt like a family. I drifted off to sleep that night, and a familiar sensation came over me. I crawled out of my body and stood at my own bedside, staring down at my sleeping form. Peace permeated my being, and it felt as if my spirit was glowing. I had hours at my fingertips. I could go anywhere and see anything, but there was only one place I wanted to go. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, I was standing in front of Collin's house. I felt a pull toward the house, to Collin. I had no intention of spying on Collin or invading his privacy. I only wanted to keep good on my promise and make sure he made it home safe. I walked through the door with ease. The house was dim and eerily quiet, but even in the dark, it was just as beautiful inside as I had imagined. I crept up the stairs without making a sound. A doorway at the top of the stairs stood open a crack. I peered inside to see Collin sitting on his bed. A dim lamp cast shadows across the wall. I breathed a sigh of relief. It was good to know he was safe. I miss her, Collin said aloud. For a beat, I thought he was talking to me, like he could see me. Then I realized he had his phone to his ear. I'd like to believe she's in a better place now, Collin added. My friend says it doesn't matter what's true, as long as I choose to believe it. So I'm going to believe that Darla's at peace, Mom. I realized he was talking to his mother. He'd never said much about her,
just that she left when he was 8. By the look on his face, he still cared very deeply for her. I didn't want to eavesdrop, so I turned to leave, until I heard my name. "There's something different about Kai," he told his mom. "I can talk to her in a way that I can't with anyone else. When everything feels like it's falling apart, she seems to hold me together somehow." I wanted to go in there and tell him everything was going to be all right, but he wouldn't hear me. "I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't changed my running route and ran into her on the bluff," Collin said. "It's like we reconnected at just the right time. I don't know how I'm going to get through this, Mom, but I know I have people to help me, and we're going to do it together." "I'll always be here for you, Collin," I said, even though I knew he couldn't hear me. I hoped that somehow he could feel it. I turned away. I didn't want to intrude on his conversation. I crossed the hall to a closed door, which I assumed must be Darla's room. I passed through the door like a ghost and stepped inside. The room was dark, lit only by a soft glow of the street lamp outside the window. The room was tidy. Pictures filled a big bulletin board next to her bed. In the photos, Darla was all smiles, standing next to her family and friends, though I noticed there were no pictures of Tiana or Sean. In one picture, she had donned ski gear and stood at the top of a mountain. In another, she held a ribbon next to Collin after completing a 5K together. I recognized Poas Volcano in the background of one of the photos. I had once visited Costa Rica while astral traveling, and Poas Volcano was one of my stops. I smiled at all the beautiful things she'd done. I turned from the photographs. Across the room, one wall housed hand-drawn photos tacked to the wall in a colorful array. Another wall was dedicated to snow globes. I remembered how Collin said she collected them. I eyed the endless shelves of snow globes and saw that they were from places all around the world. I spotted one of the Eiffel Tower and another of the Statue of Liberty. Another housed a miniature replica of the Sydney Opera House, and I noticed one depicting the pyramids of Giza. I didn't think Darla had ever been to these places, but it was obvious she admired these wonders. Darla had been a dreamer, like me. Not in the same way, but her dreams were just as real. It was clear by looking around this room that Darla had lived a good life. It wasn't fair what happened to her, but I didn't think her life could be reduced to her ending. Everything that came before it was an adventure, and she'd made the most of it all. I paused at Darla's door before exiting. "Goodbye, Darla." Chapter 18. "I thought you weren't coming into work today." Meg's voice rang out from behind me. "I'm not working," I told her, turning from the products I was browsing. I'd been called to the police station this morning for questioning, so I had to take off work last minute. Mom had to come along since I was a minor, but it wasn't as scary as I thought it'd be. I told the police the same thing I'd told Savannah and Collin, that I'd heard rumors but didn't know where they'd come from. Maybe one day I would tell someone about my abilities, but I decided that day wasn't today. Jack believed everything I told him. Finally. "What are you doing here then?" Meg asked. "I need to pick up a few ingredients. I'm making my mom's mashed potatoes for dinner. She puts French dip with bacon in it so it tastes like baked potatoes. They're the best." Meg smacked her lips. "Sounds delicious." "It is," I smiled. "I can't stay and chat though. I'm kind of in a rush." "Hot date?" she joked. My cheeks flushed at the thought. "Kind of," I admitted. Meg grinned back at me. "If you're ready, I can ring you up." "I'll be right there." I took a detour to the freezer aisle and grabbed a tub of vanilla ice cream. Meg checked me out, and I hurried home. I stashed my ingredients in the kitchen and then rushed off to my room to change into my running gear. Just as I finished tying my shoes, the doorbell rang, and my heart leapt. I quickly made my way to the door. Collin stood there, and the sight of him made my cheeks flush. "Ready?" Collin asked. "Ready to kick your butt, you mean? I'm definitely up for it," I teased. He laughed. "Race you to Eagle Park?" "You're on." Before we could even shake on it, Collin had taken off. "Hey!" I called after him, pushing my legs to catch up. I sprinted forward until we were running side by side. As we ran farther, he pushed ahead of me, but I wasn't going to let some guy with a bad ankle beat me. It didn't matter how fast I ran, though. He was always several paces ahead of me. We reached the bottom of the bluff, and I gave it my all as we ascended the trail. By the time we made it to the top, we were side by side again. Collin lay down in the grass, trying to catch his breath. That was close. I have no idea who won.
I sprawled next to him, and a few leaves crunched under my weight. What do you say we call it a tie?
If you keep running like that, you have a good chance of bringing home some titles next year in cross country. You are going to sign up, aren't you?
I tilted my head toward him, but the shine in his eyes didn't help slow my heart rate. Definitely. Collin pushed himself to his feet.
We should walk it off. Don't want your muscles tightening up after a run like that.
I stood and paced beside him. After catching our breath, Collin stopped at the guardrail near the edge of the cliff. He leaned his elbows on the wood. Why do they even bother with this thing? I asked. It's not like it stops anyone from climbing over it.
You are right, he said, before swinging his legs over the top board.
What are you doing? I cried. You could fall. Collin paced to the edge of the cliff and shot back a menacing grin.
Come on.
He held out his hand to me like he expected me to follow. Are you sure about this? I asked warily, though I remained rooted in place.
Remember when you told me you wanted to get out of Amberg so you could travel? You said you wanted an adventure.
Collin never dropped his inviting hand. I nodded. I did say that, but maybe I don't have to run away anymore. I always thought there was nothing for me here, and that traveling would help me connect with people. But I think I've been ignoring the connections I can make here at home.
Why can't you have both? Collin asked. I'll come with you on any adventure you want.
My heart fluttered. You really mean that? You would really want to go adventure with me one day?
He smiled. Why not start today? You need to stop waiting around for something to happen to you. You need to make it happen.
My heart lifted, and I felt like I was soaring. I barely had to think about it when I took Collin's outstretched hand and climbed over the barrier. I'd already made my decision. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I came closer to the edge and peered into the water below. Collin never let go of my hand. He wouldn't let me fall. I turned back to him. We were so close that our bodies were almost touching. We're really going to do this? Collin wrapped his arms around my waist, dragging me closer. My heart pitter-pattered in my chest, and it had nothing to do with the 30-foot drop beside me. Collin's lips hovered inches above my own, and I wanted nothing more than to close the distance between us.
Why not? Collin whispered. We could have so many adventures together.
My voice wavered. Like what?
Like this.
Collin tilted his head to bring his lips down to mine. He paused before our lips touched, and the way my stomach flip-flopped, it felt like I was already falling off that cliff. It was pure exhilaration, pure bliss. I took the leap and closed the distance between us. Our lips came together, and it was like plunging into the water below. I felt like I was weightless, like I was floating and may never come up for air. But it was safe here in his arms, like no harm could ever come to us. We melted into each other, until it felt like we'd become one. Finally, we drew away, wavering as we tried to catch our breath. That sounds like a wonderful adventure, I whispered. Collin beamed. Neither of us had to say another word, because we both knew what the other was thinking. We quickly stripped off our shoes, then he took my hand. We stood at the edge of the cliff, and I shot him a glance. Collin nodded. Then together, we leapt into our next adventure. This has been Distant Dreams, written by Alicia Rades, narrated by Amanda Elgie. Copyright 2016 by Alicia Rades. Production copyright 2024 by Alicia Rades.